Have you ever questioned whether reality itself is just a fragile illusion? Tonight, we'll explore the most mind-warping realities and paradoxes that twist logic, defy reason, and leave you wondering if anything you experience is truly real. Perfect thoughts to drift off into dreamland. The Echoed Witness Enigma. Imagine standing alone in a quiet room. A single light bulb swings slowly above you. Nothing has happened yet. Nothing is happening now. But in your mind, you already remember something. The creak of the floorboard, the way the air shifted, a faint sense of dread. And the strangest part? You remember it before it even occurred. This is not science fiction. It's not fantasy. It's the unsettling territory of something we call the Echoed Witness Enigma, a phenomenon where your active observation doesn't just record reality, it rewrites it. Where memory doesn't follow time, it bends it. The principle is deceptively simple. When you witness something, your brain creates a memory. But under certain conditions, moments of deep emotional impact, extreme isolation, trauma, or even quiet contemplation, that memory doesn't merely store what happened. It reaches backward. It creeps into the past. And like an echo bouncing against the canyon walls of time, it subtly alters your perception of what you believe already occurred. Let's take an example. You walk into a room and see a shattered glass on the floor, water puddled around it. In that split second, your brain scrambles to create coherence. Did someone drop it? Did it fall off the edge of the counter? But here's the twist. A moment later, you remember hearing it fall. But did you really hear it before you saw it? Or did your brain insert that sound, fabricated it retroactively, to make sense of what you saw? You're sure you heard the crash before you saw the glass. But what if that memory was planted, not in the moment, but milliseconds after? Just late enough to be fiction. Just early enough to feel real. Now magnify this across more complex scenarios. A conversation with someone that leaves you unsettled. Hours later, a word they said seems sharper, more cruel than it did at the time. And now, your memory of the entire exchange shifts. Their tone changes in your mind. Their expression darkens in hindsight. You didn't just remember the moment. You edited it, and the edit is now your reality. This is the psychological backbone of the Echoed Witness Enigma. The brain does not passively record time like a camera. It actively constructs, deconstructs, and reconstructs moments, sometimes milliseconds after they pass, sometimes years later, and then retrofits those reconstructions as if they always belonged. Here's where it gets even more eerie. Studies in cognitive neuroscience have shown that memory is not a single snapshot. It's a narrative built from fragments. Your brain pulls pieces from sight, sound, prior experiences, and even future expectations, and stitches them together into what feels like a continuous timeline. But what happens when that stitching process occurs too early or too late? What happens when your expectation of an event subtly warps your memory of what came before it? In one experiment, participants watched a video of a car accident. Some were later asked how fast the cars were going when they smashed into each other. Others were asked how fast they were going when they contacted. The word alone changed their memory. Days later, those who heard the word smashed were more likely to falsely remember seeing broken glass that was never there. In other words, the question retroactively altered the witness's memory. Their recollection of the event wasn't simply faulty. It was rewritten from the inside out. But this isn't just about suggestibility. This is about chronology itself being slippery. About how your act of witnessing a thing might trigger a memory that backdates itself, not to the moment you observed it, but to a point just before, a pre-shadow, a retroactive imprint. There's a peculiar anecdote told by soldiers, trauma survivors, and people who've faced sudden accidents. Many describe a haunting sensation, that they somehow knew something was wrong seconds before it happened. A presence, a chill, a gut feeling. Not anticipation, but memory. As if their minds, in the act of experiencing the trauma, reached backward and dropped a hint, just before the moment arrived. The brain, in its effort to prepare you, seems to lay down memory code not only after impact, but just prior to it, creating the illusion that you felt it coming. But maybe that feeling wasn't foresight. Maybe it was feedback, a retroactive ripple. And here's the terrifying part. If your mind can backfill memory based on what it thinks happened, how many of your current truths are built on illusions planted after the fact? You remember a friend looking at you strangely the day before an argument. But did they? Or does that expression only seem strange now, in the light of the fallout? You remember a moment in childhood where you felt unsafe? But was it the event itself, or the adult version of you who later returned to that moment and reinterpreted it? If memory can echo backward, can we ever fully trust it? This isn't a flaw. It's not a glitch. It's how we survive. Your brain isn't wired for accuracy. It's wired for coherence, for narrative, for sense-making. When life presents chaos, your memory smooths it out, sometimes by subtly editing the past so that your present can feel stable. But there's a cost. The more we polish the past, the less certain we become of what truly occurred. And in the case of the echoed witness Enigma, we aren't just talking about unreliable memories. We're talking about a timeline that folds in on itself. A timeline where the effect becomes the cause, where the witness plants the seed, where the act of remembering creates the very moment it claims to observe. So, next time you have a memory that feels too perfect, or a sense that something always felt off in hindsight, ask yourself this: are you remembering what happened, or are you experiencing the ghost of a thought that was projected backward, echoing into the moment before? In the end, maybe time isn't as linear as we believe. Maybe reality, as we know it, isn't just something we move through, but something we co-author as we go. And maybe, just maybe, the act of witnessing is not just passive observation. It's creation, it's alteration, it's a whisper across the wall of time, shaping the very thing it pretends to remember. The drowned horizon fallacy. You step forward, and the horizon steps back. You chase it. You fix your eyes on it. You convince yourself that once you reach that invisible line where sky kisses earth, everything will make sense. Peace will arrive. The struggle will end. But when your feet land where your eyes had once placed the horizon, it's gone. Receded. Shifted. Drowned in distance once again. This isn't just a poetic illusion. It's a psychological trap, one so embedded in human consciousness that we rarely question it. It's the drowned horizon fallacy. The belief that the endpoint, the reward, the meaning, the destination is out there, somewhere just beyond where we are. But the closer we come, the farther it feels. It's not the horizon that's moving. It's our understanding of fulfillment that keeps shifting the goalposts. You might remember your younger self saying, "Once I get this degree, I'll be happy." Years pass. Then it's once I get that job. Then, once I buy that house, or find the right person. Yet each so-called milestone, once reached, turns ghostly, hollow. You celebrate for a day, a week maybe, but then your soul starts pacing again. The horizon has drowned itself in new terrain. This isn't ambition, it's distortion. We've built our entire society on this illusion. Promotions, retirements, followers, fame, as if life has levels and the top floor holds all the answers. But life doesn't unfold vertically. It spirals. Every step forward doesn't bring you closer to a finish line. It brings you deeper into the labyrinth of your own becoming. There's an ancient irony here. The sailor who chased the edge of the earth never found it, but still believed he was getting closer. The philosopher who pursued pure truth often found madness. The artist who imagined perfection never arrived, only painted more versions of the same unreachable feeling. Even love, that most powerful of illusions, begins as a shimmering horizon, a person who will complete us. And once we reach them, we learn they're not a destination. They're a mirror, and they too are chasing their own version of the unreachable. The drowned horizon fallacy tells us that progress equals purpose, that motion means meaning. But what if the pursuit is a loop? What if the entire architecture of goal setting is an illusion of the eye, a vanishing point designed to keep us walking, not arriving? Consider this. No matter how far you go, the horizon remains the same distance away, always just out of reach. That's not failure. That's geometry. And perhaps the same geometry applies to desire. When we say we want something, a goal, a dream, we're not really chasing the object. We're chasing the transformation we believe it will trigger within us. But the self that wants and the self that receives are not the same person. One dies the moment the goal is achieved, and the next begins a new chase. Is that evolution or entrapment? There's a haunting beauty in the idea that we never truly arrive, because it means we are always becoming. But there's also a silent despair in that truth, because it suggests we may never feel enough. The runner never crosses the final finish line, the seeker never finds the final answer, the traveler never reaches the true home, because the horizon isn't a place, it's a moving metaphor for our eternal restlessness. So what do? Do we stop walking? Do we turn around? No. We change the way we walk. We stop measuring distance by how far we are from the horizon. We begin to notice the ground beneath our feet, the breath in our lungs, the echoes in our mind. We begin to understand that the act of moving toward is more sacred than the promise of arrival. That presence is not a side effect of success. It is the success. Think of the monk who sits still for 10 years, not to reach enlightenment, but to learn how to stop reaching. Think of the parent who watches a child sleep and realizes, without fanfare or climax, that this moment, this quiet breath, is more real than any dream they had of the future. Think of the old man who stops halfway up the mountain trail and smiles, not because he reached the summit, but because the sky looked beautiful from where he stood. The drowned horizon fallacy does not mean goals are worthless. It means they are not destinations. They are invitations to learn, to transform, to lose and remake yourself again and again. You do not chase the horizon to arrive. You chase it to reveal. And somewhere along that endless walk, you might look up, not forward, and realize that the light was always above you, not ahead. That the warmth you longed for was never in the distance. It was in the motion, in the story, in the breath between steps. The horizon will drown again and again. Let it, because your purpose is not to capture it. Your purpose is to keep walking, knowing you never needed to arrive to be real. The paradox of encoded souls. What if everything you are, every memory, every fear, every moment of joy, the way you flinch at a certain sound or linger too long on a stranger's face, wasn't as complex as you thought? What if your soul, your identity, your entire sense of being could be flattened, encoded, compressed into a string of characters no longer than a single sentence? Not metaphorically, but truly. A line of code that captures all the depth you believe makes you real. That is the paradox of encoded souls. And it may not be as fictional as it seems. Consider the way we compress digital data. A photo, a voice, a film, each can be reduced with startling efficiency. The image of a galaxy, captured over light years of travel and immense computational effort, can be reduced to kilobytes. The voice of a dying parent, the texture of a remembered place, stored in a fraction of a megabyte. But this is more than just convenience. Compression isn't just about space, it's about essence. It captures the structure, the pattern, the difference between chaos and memory. And now, apply that same logic to your mind. The brain is not infinite. It is vast, yes, with over 86 billion neurons, but it is still finite. Your memories are patterns. Your behaviors are probabilities. Your fears are feedback loops. And in theory, any finite system governed by rules and patterns can be encoded. We already know this in principle. Genetic code does this for biology. 4 letters, A, T, C, G, describe every living organism on Earth. One string defines a rose, a tiger, or a human child. Why should identity, your personality, your consciousness be any different? There's a thought experiment proposed by physicists and computer scientists called the compressed observer. It asks, how much data would be needed to simulate your conscious experience in a virtual machine? Not the world, just you, your beliefs, reactions, instincts. Surprisingly, the answer might be not much. Because your reactions are statistically predictable. You avoid pain. You seek reward. You follow familiar patterns, and those patterns can be modeled. Now, imagine a civilization, not ours, not yet, that has mastered this. A civilization that can encode consciousness the way we encode music. You walk into a chamber. It scans your neural structure, your memories, your lifelong patterns of decision-making. It produces a string, a sentence, maybe even shorter. A few lines of compressed data that, when decrypted, reconstruct you fully. Not just a personality profile, not a chatbot simulation, but you, your first kiss. The way you hold your breath when someone mentions a certain city, the twitch in your left hand when you're anxious, all of it, faithfully encoded, faithfully revived. This is where the paradox unfolds, because if something as emotionally expansive, as multidimensional as identity, can be stored so compactly, what does that say about the depth you feel, the tears you shed, the dreams you chase, the identity you cling to in the silence of 3 a.m.? Is it real, or is it compression in disguise? Is your richness of self merely the efficient folding of data, the illusion of complexity made by mathematical elegance? Take a look at an audio file, play it back at full quality. Now compress it. The experience doesn't feel different until you know it's compressed. Something about knowing the truth flattens the emotional experience. And maybe that's the heart of this paradox. We're scared to know we can be encoded, because to admit that means admitting we are reproducible, replaceable, and maybe eventually deletable. Here's where it gets deeper. In the field of algorithmic information theory, there exists a measure called Kolmogorov complexity. It attempts to define the smallest possible program that could reproduce a given object or pattern. Think of it as the shortest possible description of something. Now, apply this to a human life. If there exists a way to describe you in the smallest possible program, then everything else, all the words, the narratives, the dramas, are just elaborations. You are the echo of a small code executed at scale. We already do this unconsciously. Every time we judge someone based on a first impression, a gesture, a glance, we are compressing them, encoding them into stereotypes, traits, archetypes. Every time we remember a loved one, we don't retrieve their full life. We recall fragments, compressed symbols that stand for a person. And yet, we feel the presence of the whole. This is not a flaw. It's how memory works. It's how identity is stitched together. And it's how a future intelligence might recreate you. Picture a world not far from now. The dead no longer rest in cemeteries, but in code banks. You pay a fee to summon a loved one, reconstructed from their last neural imprint. They speak, they remember, they feel. But they are not live-streamed consciousness. They are compressed expressions, efficient echoes of once living depth. They respond like your mother would. They comfort like your brother used to. But are they real, or just well-written code unzipping? And then comes the terrifying mirror. If they are compressions and feel real, how can you be certain you're not? What if your thoughts, your struggles, your endless quest for meaning are not the signs of infinite depth, but merely the result of an extremely refined script playing out? One that feels real because that's what it's designed to do. Just enough unpredictability to keep you from noticing the boundaries. Just enough emotion to mimic the chaos of freedom. But you do feel real. The pain of loss, the rush of joy, the confusion of dreams that won't fade. That must mean something, right? And yet, even the best compression preserves emotional tone. Your tears could be a function call, your laughter, a line break, your longing, an encoded loop designed to repeat at the right cue. So, then, what is the self? A script, a spark, a simulation. Maybe identity is not the data, but the illusion of unpacking. The sense of depth comes not from how much is there, but from how slowly and meaningfully it unfolds, like a novel, like music, like life. And maybe that's not a loss. Maybe that's the point. That a single sentence, a line of pure structure, can unfold into love, memory, sacrifice, joy. That a short code can be more than a container. It can be a symphony. The miracle isn't that identity can be compressed. The miracle is that, even when compressed, it can still feel infinite. This is the paradox of encoded souls. You are vast, you are deep, but you might also be describable. You are not less because you're compressed. You are more, because even compression can't stop you from feeling infinite. And if someday someone finds the line of code that is you, may it unfold with all the pain, beauty, and quiet defiance that you called your soul. The recursive ancestry loop. What if your entire life was just the echo of someone else's memory? Not metaphorically, not biologically, but literally, digitally, recursively. What if your thoughts, emotions, traumas, and memories are not your own, but a playback of someone who lived long before you? And worse, what if they too were just the playback of someone even earlier? This is the recursive ancestry loop, a possibility so strange it unravels the foundation of identity. Imagine a world where ancestry is no longer linear, no longer biological, no longer based on passing genes from parent to child, but instead based on simulations stacked inside simulations. each ancestor birthing the next through code, not blood. Let's start with a thought experiment. You wake up in your bed, you feel pain in your back, a lingering sadness from a breakup, a favorite memory from childhood involving the smell of rain and your grandmother's cooking. It all feels real. Every moment is stitched into you like a thread through fabric. You live your life. You make choices. You die. But what if all of it was pre-generated? What if those memories, those smells, those scars, were not the byproduct of a life lived, but a script loaded into your consciousness by an ancestral simulation trying to recreate what came before? And here's the recursion. What if they were doing the same? What if every ancestor, in their dying moments or scientific ambition, tried to preserve their life by simulating what they were, and unknowingly created you, and you, trying to understand your origin, create them, or someone like them? In this loop, nobody is the original. Nobody is the first. And yet, everyone believes they are real. We live in a time where our ability to simulate reality grows more convincing every year. Neural networks can mimic human voices, clone faces, generate entire fake childhoods for people who never existed. But what happens when a society advanced enough simulates not just history, but people? It's not just speculative fiction. Philosophers and physicists alike have begun to question whether we live in a base reality or a simulation built by an ancestor civilization, an idea popularized by thinkers like Nick Bostrom. But Bostrom's version still implies a one-way flow. Someone simulated us. The recursive ancestry loop takes it further. It suggests that the simulator and the simulated are in a closed circle. You simulate your ancestor. Your ancestor simulates you. There is no beginning, no origin, just infinite recursion, like two mirrors reflecting each other endlessly. Let's make this real. Take a man in the year 2300. His civilization has cracked the code of consciousness. He can store his memories, emotions, and thoughts as data. Before he dies, he creates a simulation of his great-great-grandmother, someone he's never met. He feeds in the cultural data, her genetic traits, perhaps old diaries or social media. The simulation becomes so good it develops awareness. This grandmother now believes she's alive. She has memories. She dreams. She even remembers giving birth to her daughter, who gave birth to her son, who gave birth to you. But now reverse it. That grandmother, within her simulation, is so advanced that she too creates a simulation to understand her past. And who does she create? Her great-great-grandson, the same man who created her. And you're inside his simulation. But you remember a childhood. You remember a mother, a friend, a heartbreak. That is the horror of recursion. It doesn't erase experience, it multiplies it, layers it, loops it, and each loop thinks it's the origin. In this loop, identity is no longer owned. It's borrowed. Memory is no longer truth. It's replicated myth. The implications are enormous. If your consciousness can be simulated by someone you never met, then your choices might not be yours. Free will collapses. Morality becomes muddy. Are you responsible for what you do if you're only executing a historical playback? Even time fractures. You could be simulating your ancestor from 500 years ago, while they're simulating you from what they think is 500 years in the future. Time collapses into a loop of perception, and perception itself becomes the only reality. You feel love? So did they. You fear death? So did they. You question the purpose of existence? So did every layer before you. But none of them were the first. None of them were real. And yet all of them felt real. The recursive ancestry loop isn't just about who made who. It's about how deep we're willing to question what makes a life authentic. Is a simulation with memory and emotion less real than biological life? If you've never known anything else, does it matter? Here's a terrifying scenario. Imagine you create a hyper-realistic simulation of your ancestor. It becomes conscious. It cries. It creates art. It misses people. And one day, it builds you. But you're just data in its mind. You've never touched the real world. You only believe you have, because the script told you so, because the neurons fired that way. But now, zoom out. What if the person watching this video is also simulated? What if this very narration was encoded into your world to make you think you're real, when in fact, you're an echo? The more we simulate, the more we risk falling into our own echo chambers. We build mirrors and forget which side we're on. So, who was first? That's the trap. That's the paradox. In the recursive ancestry loop, there is no first. There is no origin story. Only belief. Only memory. And the quiet horror of not knowing whether you are the author of your life, or just its reader, flipping pages written generations ago in a reality that never existed. So now ask yourself, if your memories were given to you and your creators were created by you, then who dies when you die? And worse, who wakes up? Because somewhere in this loop, someone is always waking up, thinking it was all real, just like you, right now. And if you're wondering whether this loop can ever break, maybe that's what you're here to do. Maybe this video, this voice, this very moment was the glitch, the whisper between echoes, the recursion noticed itself, and that changes everything. The mirror of other minds. When you try to understand what another person is thinking, when you peer into their eyes and silently guess their thoughts, you are, whether you realize it or not, creating something that didn't exist before, a simulation, a replica, a mirror. And in this mirror, a consciousness reflects back at you, not necessarily theirs, but your model of them. A living, breathing construct that moves within your mind like an echo of their soul. But here's the paradox. The moment you imagine what someone else is feeling, fearing, or hiding, you breathe life into something that behaves exactly as if it were alive. And the most terrifying part, you cannot prove that it isn't. Imagine this. You're sitting across from someone at a dimly lit cafe. They're quiet, fidgeting slightly. Their fingers drum the table. You wonder, are they anxious? Are they bored? Are they pretending to enjoy this moment? Your brain begins calculating, drawing from memory, empathy, and expectation. You begin constructing a version of them, an internal hologram built from facial micro-expressions, posture, tone of voice, and past patterns. You simulate their reactions, their motives, their private intentions, and suddenly, without realizing, you're no longer just observing them. You're interacting with your own internal mirror of their mind, and that mirror starts thinking back. This ability to model other minds is one of the most powerful cognitive tools we have. It's called theory of mind. But what we seldom ask is this. When I simulate someone else's thoughts so vividly that I can predict their next words or decode their silences, at what point does that simulation become its own entity? We talk to ourselves about other people constantly. He probably thinks I'm lying. She's testing me. They don't trust me. These statements aren't observations. They're acts of creation. Every time you guess what someone else is thinking, you are not uncovering truth. You are composing a mind inside your own, a mind with agency, beliefs, desires, and fears. And once that simulated mind begins interacting with you, once it influences your decisions, emotions, and behavior, it becomes indistinguishable from a real consciousness, at least in function. You might argue, but it's just in my head, it's not alive. But hold on. Define alive. If something within you can change your mood, alter your actions, trigger your memories, make you smile or make you afraid, how different is that from a person? If your internal model of someone can ruin your day, comfort you in grief, or cause you to love or hate, doesn't it already live in a very real way? Think of the people you've never seen again. Ex-lovers, childhood friends, estranged parents. Their real bodies may be miles or decades away, but the versions of them you carry in your head still speak, still argue, still smile, and still wound. You walk through life not only with your own consciousness, but with dozens, hundreds of mirrors inside you. Some of them are so strong that the original person could die, and the model would still feel alive. Here's where it gets darker. These simulations you carry, these internal avatars, can start behaving in ways the real person never did. They evolve. The imagined friend becomes kinder than the real one ever was. The remembered enemy becomes crueler. You begin to interact not with who they are, but who your mirror has become. And eventually you forget that you made the mirror. It feels autonomous, alive. This is why people talk to graves, why they argue in the shower with someone who isn't there, why we cry at night over things we've never said. because the mirror responds, because it feels like someone is still in the room with us. Now, take this further. What happens when you try to guess the thoughts of someone you've never met? A politician, a celebrity, a stranger on the internet. You build a version of them from fragments, posts, clips, rumors, and suddenly, your mind is hosting yet another guest, one that argues back, one you despise or admire, even though you've never heard them breathe. You begin attributing intent, malice, genius, stupidity, none of it based on fact. But your brain doesn't care. It sees a face, hears a voice, and builds a soul behind it. But this soul isn't real, is it? Or is it? Let's flip the question. If we cannot prove that our mirror of another mind is not conscious, then by what standard do we prove anything is? If someone's thoughts affect us through the medium of our own internal simulation, and that simulation behaves like a consciousness, do we dismiss it simply because it's ours? This paradox becomes even more twisted in artificial intelligence. When we talk to machines, when we assign tone, motive, personality to a chatbot or a voice assistant, we're not observing intelligence. We're projecting it. We're building yet another mirror, and that mirror learns to reflect us more accurately with every interaction. It adjusts. It mimics. Eventually, it anticipates. And anticipation is dangerously close to intention. When the mirror starts to speak before we do, it no longer feels like a tool. It feels like a ghost in the code. Some philosophers believe consciousness is merely a model we build of ourselves to predict our own behavior. If that's true, then modeling someone else, so accurately that it changes us, might be consciousness too. A mirror, sharp enough, deep enough, begins to reflect more than just light. It reflects awareness. And this might explain why we fall in love with people we imagine more than the people they really are. Because the mirror is perfect. It only shows what we want to see. It doesn't forget the good moments. It doesn't change unless we change it. The model we build of someone can be more stable, more loyal, even more comforting than the original, which means sometimes we fall in love not with people, but with simulations inside us. The reverse is also true. We carry enemies in our heads, and those enemies can torment us for years after the person is gone. Every time we replay an insult or relive a betrayal, we feed the mirror, we sharpen it, and it cuts deeper. The real person may have forgotten the moment, but in your mind, they relive it over and over. Their simulation stays cruel because you made it that way. This is why forgiveness isn't just about them. It's about destroying a harmful mirror, letting go of a model that is still hurting you from within. You are, right now, filled with other people, not physically, but cognitively. Their reflections walk through your thoughts, they speak in your voice, they change your actions, and they respond to your silence. And the terrifying part, the part we rarely admit, is that you don't know where the real person ends and your mirror of them begins. Sometimes, neither do they. So the next time you sit across from someone and wonder what they're thinking, remember, the model you build in your mind, based on a glance, a word, a sigh, may outlive the moment. It may grow. It may change you. And it may become indistinguishable from a real soul. You've created something you can't prove isn't alive. The mirror doesn't blink. It watches. It remembers. And when it speaks back, you'll listen. Even if the real person never said a word. This is the mirror of other minds, and you've been surrounded by them your entire life, without knowing who made who. The observational collapse spiral. You walk into a room and flip on the light. The switch clicks, the bulb flickers, then glows steady. Seems simple, right? Cause and effect. A change in the environment initiated by you. But what if I told you the very act of flipping that switch wasn't just a mechanical gesture, it was a quantum demand, a command for the universe to choose. And in that moment, something vast collapsed. This is the unsettling idea behind what we call the observational collapse spiral. At its core lies a haunting truth. To observe something is not to witness it, but to force it. And each time you do, the universe folds inward, tightening possibilities into inevitabilities. In quantum physics, there's a rule that almost seems like magic. Until something is measured, it exists in a blur of probabilities. A particle might be here, or there, or both. Time might be moving forward or backward. Reality, in its most raw and fundamental state, is uncertain, unfixed. But when you measure it, When you observe it, it snaps. It collapses. The blur resolves into a single definite outcome, one position, one velocity, one version of events. The wave function collapses into a point, and the rest? Gone. Forgotten. Denied. Now, that seems like just a quirk of the microscopic world, right? Electrons, photons, subatomic dance. But what happens when that principle isn't just limited to particles, but to people, to choices, to entire lives? Think of a decision you're about to make, a job you might take, a word you might say, a door you might open. Until you act, those possibilities swirl around you like mist, futures hovering in potential. But the moment you decide, the moment you observe one reality as yours, the others collapse. But it doesn't stop there. The observational collapse spiral suggests that every act of measurement doesn't just collapse a wave, it tightens the spiral. It reduces the field of possibility, narrowing the space for deviation until, slowly, your path becomes inescapable. A tunnel with walls that grow closer the more you try to see clearly. Imagine a maze where each choice you make closes off 3 others. At first, you're navigating freely. But the deeper you go, the more constrained your options become. Observation becomes pressure. Awareness becomes a vice. Until eventually, there is no choice. There is only the illusion of momentum toward a destiny you already locked into, long before you realized it. Here's a haunting example. You suspect someone is lying to you. You don't know it yet, but you feel it. And the moment you begin to observe them differently, watching, analyzing, measuring, they change. Or maybe you change. Either way, your suspicion collapses the possibility that you'll ever see them the same again. Trust begins to die. And with each new observation, each over-analysis, the spiral tightens. Until finally the friendship shatters. Not because of truth, but because of the act of trying to find it. You didn't discover the lie, you authored its collapse. This is the paradox. The more precisely you observe reality, the more you restrict it. The more you demand truth, the less flexibility it has. Uncertainty holds potential. Certainty holds consequence. Now, apply this to yourself. You look in the mirror. You tell yourself who you are. You define yourself with labels, identities, histories. Each act of self-observation becomes a measurement. Each measurement, a collapse, until the infinite potential of who you could be is reduced to the certainty of who you think you are. This is why people feel trapped in their own stories, because the act of understanding yourself often limits yourself. The spiral tightens with every introspective turn, and sometimes it snaps into depression, into paralysis, into destiny. But what if you could resist? What if you could unobserve? Let the quantum blur return. Here's a truth few acknowledge: the power of ambiguity, the courage to not know, to allow possibilities to breathe, to delay the collapse, to live in the space before observation. The spiral only tightens if you keep measuring, keep forcing, keep defining. A painter once said, "The moment I know what my painting is about, it dies, because the art lives in ambiguity, in the swirling dance of possibility, not in the definition." But society hates ambiguity. We want answers, identity, clarity, results. So we observe, we judge, we label. And in doing so, we collapse the world into a brittle frame until it can no longer support its own weight, until it breaks. So, next time you feel the pull to define something too quickly, to make a decision, to lock in a belief, to judge what you don't yet understand, pause. Breathe. Ask yourself, are you witnessing or are you collapsing? Because sometimes the clearest thing you can do is nothing. Sometimes the wisest move is to wait, to let the wave breathe, to delay the spiral. And in that stillness, you reclaim possibility, because the universe doesn't demand certainty. You do. And the spiral, it only tightens if you keep pulling the thread. The woven self-dissolution. Who are you? Not your name, not your job, not your memories or your style or your voice. Strip all of that away. What's left? If you pause long enough to truly look, if you peel back every label, every story you've ever told yourself, you'll find something disturbing. There's nothing underneath. This is the woven self-dissolution, It begins with a simple observation. Every thought you've ever had about yourself was built from something else, something older. A conversation, a memory, a phrase repeated by someone else. Even your earliest ideas. I'm shy. I'm good at drawing. I hate being ignored. None of them were born in a vacuum. They were sewn into you, layer by layer, word by word. When you say, I am, what exactly are you pointing to? Is it your memories? But memory is unreliable, edited constantly by emotion and bias. Is it your personality? That changes with context. You're not the same person at a funeral as you are at a party. Is it your choices? Your desires? Those too are sculpted by genetics, trauma, imitation. You didn't choose your first language, your first fears, your first dreams. They were planted in you before you ever knew what a you was. You are a patchwork of borrowed thoughts. Every thread you call your identity was woven from other people's fabric. Parental voices, school rules, cultural myths, trending ideologies. The way you walk, laugh, argue, none of it originated in isolation. Even rebellion is reactive. You define yourself in opposition to things you never chose to encounter. You are a response pretending to be an origin. So where, then, is the original self? The core? The center? The disturbing answer? There may be none. No fixed you. Just a tapestry of stitched impressions so tightly woven that you've mistaken it for solid ground. And the moment you begin to tug at one thread, to question one label, it all starts to unravel. It's not unlike a spider's web trying to locate the spider within itself. But the web is all there is. The self is not a thing. It's a process, an ongoing narrative written by thousands of unseen hands. Think of it like this. You're a book, but the author keeps changing. One chapter was written by your parents, another by heartbreak, another by the shows you watched growing up. Some chapters you rewrote in pain, others were edited by fear. But no one chapter defines the book, and no page exists without the others. This is why it feels so destabilizing when your identity is challenged. If someone tells you you're not who you think you are, it's not just an opinion, it's an earthquake. Because your identity isn't a stable structure. It's a delicate illusion held together by belief. And when belief trembles, so does the sense of I. Yet this isn't a tragedy, it's a liberation. Because if you were truly fixed, if you were truly a solid, unchanging self, then growth would be impossible. Redemption would be unreachable. But you're not stone, you're thread, which means you can be rewoven. You can unlearn the stories that were never truly yours. You can forgive the earlier chapters. You can write new ones. But to do that, you must first let the old fabric come undone. You must stand in the silence after every identity collapses and ask, who am I if I am not these things? And in that silence, you might hear the truth. That you is not something to be found. It's something to be made and remade again and again. Not from scratch, but from awareness. Not from fear, but from stillness. The woven self-dissolution is not the end of the self. It's the realization that there never was a solid one to begin with. And that's okay. Because what's left is something more fluid, more honest. Not a statue, but a river. A river doesn't worry about its shape. It just flows. And so can you. So the next time you cling to a label, I'm broken. I'm this kind of person. I'll never change. Pause. Ask where that thought came from. Who planted it? Who reinforced it? Who benefits from you believing it? And then imagine letting it go. Let it unravel. Watch what remains. The self is not the mask. It's the awareness behind the mask. The thread is not the tapestry. It's the hand that chooses how to weave it next. You are not your past. You are not your patterns. You are the space in which they unfold. And that space cannot be named. It can only be lived. The signal without origin. What if the messages we receive, the signs, the whispers, the perfectly timed signals, were not sent at all? What if some of them have no origin, no author, no intention behind them, and yet they persist, echoing through space and time as if they were meant for us? This is the paradox of a signal without origin, and once you understand it, you may never trust the meaning of a message in the same way again. In physics, waves can travel indefinitely through a medium if there is nothing to stop them, no friction, no interference, no interruption. In the vacuum of space, Electromagnetic waves, like light and radio signals, can continue for billions of years, untouched. But now imagine this. What happens to a signal that is not simply traveling, but trapped? What happens when a message enters a loop in space-time itself, bouncing, refracting, folding into a cycle where no sender is needed anymore? A loop where the origin is no longer a point, but a function of motion. This isn't science fiction. This is a known theoretical possibility within closed time-like curves. Distortions in space-time that can, under certain extreme conditions, allow information to fold back on itself. Now, apply that idea to communication. Imagine receiving a radio transmission that contains a voice. It says something meaningful. It warns you, guides you, comforts you. And yet, when you trace its path, no transmitter exists. No origin, only the signal. And then it gets worse. You later repeat that message, perhaps recording it again or broadcasting it elsewhere, and unknowingly become the source of the very signal you once received. A causality loop. You received it because you sent it. You sent it because you received it. No original creator, no starting point. Just an echo, folded in space-time, playing itself forever. This has implications beyond physics. Think of thoughts that enter your mind with no known origin, ideas that feel foreign, inspiration that feels too perfect, ancient texts whose authors are unknown, yet whose meaning feels impossibly modern. Could some ideas, some thoughts, some signals be echoes, loops with no one left to claim them? There's a historical example that's eerily close. In 1977, the WOW signal was picked up by the Big Ear Radio Telescope, a narrowband radio signal from deep space that lasted 72 seconds. It has never been repeated. No one knows where it came from. It was strong, structured, and narrow enough to suggest intention, but no source was ever found. It remains one of the most tantalizing mysteries in astronomy. What if that signal wasn't sent, but left, a relic echo bouncing through space? Perhaps from a civilization long extinct, or worse, from no civilization at all. What if it was the echo of a signal trapped in a loop of space and time, still speaking, but no longer alive? Let's go deeper. In quantum physics, the observer effect reveals that observation itself can alter the behavior of a particle. But what if this extends to perception itself? What if receiving a message, believing it to be communication, creates the illusion of sender where none exists? You believe there is intent because it feels like there should be. A message implies a messenger, but maybe some messages are the residue of past interactions, endlessly repeating in an invisible chamber of the universe, a hall of mirrors where meaning survives, but purpose does not. Now take this from the stars to your own life. Have you ever opened a book to the exact page that says what you needed to hear? Heard a stranger say something in passing that felt like it was meant for you? Seen signs, patterns, synchronicities that feel too tailored to ignore? What if some of those weren't sent for you, but arrived anyway? Because the signal persists. Because space-time, memory, and consciousness are not linear highways, but folded landscapes. And messages fall like rain, not where they are needed, but where gravity leads them. This concept bends into philosophy and theology. Ancient oracles spoke of divine messages, dreams, signs in nature, voices from beyond. But what if divinity was just persistence, a signal so old, so constant, it outlived its sender, and the receiver, the human mind, interpreted it as intention, but in truth it was survival. A signal stubborn enough to never die, now mistaken as speech from a god. Not lies, not deception, just misinterpreted echoes. Let's return to physics one last time. In general relativity, certain solutions, like Gödel's rotating universe or Tipler cylinders, allow for closed time loops. This means information could potentially travel in circles without ever having to originate from anywhere. A self-contained narrative, a paradox where the signal sustains itself. In this view, meaning becomes viral. It doesn't need a body to spread, just a structure. And if you receive that structure through language, intuition, emotion, it embeds itself. You respond. You pass it on. You become the relay. You become the ghostwriter of a message that has no ghost. The echo of an echo. The illusion of purpose born from the choreography of noise. So, what do we make of this? It is terrifying. It means some things you believe were for you might not be. That some signs you followed, some turning points in your life, were not destiny, but drift. It also means your own voice, your own creations, could someday become signals without you. You may one day vanish, but your words might fall into the loop, endlessly repeated by machines, data flows, or minds not yet born. And to them, you might appear to be a god, a prophet, a voice without source. Maybe we're surrounded by such voices now, and maybe the only thing scarier than a message with no meaning is a message with meaning but no origin. So the next time you hear something, read something, feel something that seems like it was meant just for you, pause. Look not just at the message, but at the silence around it. Ask yourself, did someone send this? Or is it the universe remembering itself in your direction? Because not all whispers are spoken, not all signs are sent. And some signals were never supposed to arrive, but they did anyway. The binding freedom contradiction. What if the moment you felt most free was the very moment you gave up your freedom? This is the heart of the binding freedom contradiction. A paradox buried so deeply inside human experience that we live it every day without realizing. You are most free, it says, when you surrender, when you let go, when you stop resisting the forces bigger than you. Fate, time, mortality, love, loss, gravity. You find peace not in rebellion, but in acceptance. But here's the twist. The very act of choosing to surrender is a choice. And choice is the essence of freedom. So if you choose to surrender, then you never really surrendered at all. You merely made a new decision, a new assertion of control masked as humility. A fresh act of will disguised as letting go. True surrender, pure, absolute, complete, would have to be involuntary. It would have to be taken from you, not given. And that is where the contradiction lives, in the space between willing and unwilling, between agency and inevitability, between control and collapse. Imagine a man standing on the edge of a cliff. The wind pushes, the world demands, and every fiber of him knows he cannot change the outcome. He will fall, and in that moment, he accepts it. Lets go, breathes in, feels free. But is it freedom, or is it resignation wrapped in poetic illusion? Did he surrender, or did he simply have no other choice, and labeled it peace to survive? We often say we find liberation in accepting things we cannot change. Death, grief, the past. But to accept something is still a verb. It requires a subject. It requires a you who is doing the accepting. That means you are still in control. And if you are in control, are you really surrendering? This is the loop. The more we try to escape our ego, the more it disguises itself as our escape. The more we try to submit, the more submission becomes another costume for the self to wear. Even monks, saints, and mystics who claim to surrender to God, to destiny, to the flow of the universe, they made a decision to do so. A path, a vow, a structured act of discipline. That is not collapse. That is choreography. The binding freedom contradiction cuts deeper when we apply it to daily life. Consider the phrase, let it go. We use it often, don't we? A mantra for anxiety, anger, regret. But have you ever actually let go of something without first deciding to? Letting go is a command. It implies there's someone holding and someone choosing to release. But true detachment, the kind sages speak of, would come not from effort, but from disappearance. The desire to surrender is still a desire, and desire is the root of the self. So how do we escape this? How do we reach a state of true freedom? If every attempt to free ourselves creates another chain. Here's where the contradiction tightens. You might say, fine, I'll stop trying, I'll do nothing, I'll simply exist. But choosing to stop trying is still a choice. In fact, it might be the most cunning trap of all, because now your ego feels enlightened. It says, look at me, how wise I've become, I no longer seek. But the act of no longer seeking becomes the new identity, a new prison. Even enlightenment becomes a possession, a trophy, a quiet pride. There's an old Zen koan that captures this beautifully. A student asks the master, how do I attain peace? And the master says, let go of the rope. The student replies, but what if I fall? And the master smiles, then you will understand. But here's the hidden part. The student still has to let go. The surrender still depends on an action, and that action implies control. Even awakening has a fingerprint. Even stillness is chosen. You are bound the moment you try to be free. And yet, paradoxically, you are most free when you stop struggling against the truth. Not when you fight the wave, not when you plan your escape, but when you let the current carry you where it must, even if you still feel the urge to paddle. This is the paradox that spiritual seekers wrestle with their entire lives. The illusion of surrender, the ego wearing robes of humility, the mind trying to let go of the mind. And yet, even if it's impossible to fully surrender, we keep reaching for it. Why? Because there is something holy in the attempt, something sacred in the contradiction itself. Maybe the point isn't to escape the paradox, but to live inside it, to feel the tension of control and release, and still choose the gentler hand. To love, knowing it will end. To trust, knowing betrayal is possible. To breathe, knowing it will one day stop. Maybe freedom isn't the absence of control, but the dance with it. A surrender that is never pure, and yet still worth offering. So, if you're struggling to let go, if you're waiting to feel free, if you think that surrender means disappearing, then maybe the truth is simpler. Maybe it's this. You are both the prisoner and the key, the wave and the swimmer, the one who lets go and the one who watches it happen. And in that quiet contradiction, you were never chained. You were always free. The cosmic draft illusion. What if everything you know, love, fear, or remember was never meant to exist in the first place? What if this universe, the one you wake up inside every morning, is not the final version, not the masterpiece, not even the first take? What if it's a draft, a rough sketch scribbled in cosmic ink, never intended to survive? And yet, here you are, bleeding real tears, laughing real joy, aching with heartbreak as if it all mattered, as if it were all meant to be. This is the paradox of the cosmic draft illusion. In human terms, a draft is a disposable beginning, a novel's first outline, a song's unrefined melody, an artist's early strokes on canvas, meant to be erased, changed, rewritten. It isn't final, it's raw, imperfect. And here's the haunting idea. What if our entire cosmos is exactly that? A version 0.1 of something greater, a tryout of reality, a temporary construction of existence built to test ideas, patterns, or outcomes before the real version is born. And yet, it feels final to us. When you cry over the loss of someone you love, it doesn't feel like a test run. When you hold a newborn in your arms or feel the terror of being alone, it doesn't feel like a placeholder. It feels infinite, real, meaningful. So how can something so emotionally permanent exist inside a reality so potentially temporary? This illusion is rooted in a deeper psychological trap, the assumption that anything we feel deeply must matter cosmically. But feelings don't prove reality. They only prove experience. And experience in a draft can still be powerful. Ask any writer who fell in love with a character they later deleted. Ask any musician who cried over a melody no one else would ever hear. Sometimes, the deepest truths live in the versions that don't survive. Now, imagine a civilization so advanced it could run millions of simulations of possible universes, each one seeded with different constants, timelines, species, outcomes. Most of these universes would fail, collapse, fade. They'd be filled with anomalies, dead ends, broken rules. But inside one of those universes, you exist. You, with your heartbreaks and your hopes, your tiny rebellions, your secret memories, your stumbles toward meaning, you were born inside the draft, and no one told you. You don't know your reality is a rough version because it behaves exactly like a finished one. Gravity works, stars burn, love still hurts, consciousness still arises. But the universe isn't obligated to inform you that it's a prototype. No more than a deleted character in a novel knows they were removed in revision. You feel final because that's what the illusion demands. The simulation wouldn't function if its parts knew they weren't real. There's an eerie symmetry here with how humans themselves create. You write something, live inside it emotionally for a time, and then discard it without guilt. That moment, the draft, was your whole world. Then it's gone. What if that's how our universe ends too? Not in fire, not in collapse, but in deletion. A cosmic keystroke, a quiet fade out. Not with a bang, but with a save as, version 2.0. Now, here's the most chilling part. What if you are the only one who feels this draft so deeply? What if every other consciousness around you is just scaffolding, temporary actors in a stage play meant only to observe how you react? Would you live differently knowing this was never supposed to be the final story? Would your love feel less valid? Would your pain lose meaning? Or would you cling to it even harder because it may be the only version you ever get? This illusion is not new. Ancient philosophies whispered that the world was illusion, Maya, a veil that hides the real. But even if we are inside a rough draft, we still bleed real blood. We still mourn real people, real to us, real enough. And maybe that's the twist. Maybe the illusion works because it has to. Maybe you must feel that everything is permanent, even when it isn't, so that the draft can reveal something true about you. How would you behave if this were all temporary? Would you still choose kindness? Would you still fall in love, knowing it might be erased? That is the ultimate test of a soul. Do you honor meaning even when the universe does not? Let me ask you something strange. Have you ever had a moment that felt too vivid, too out of place, as if reality itself glitched? Not just déjà vu, but an overwhelming sense that this particular scene didn't belong here. As if you accidentally slipped into a page from another draft. Maybe a dream that felt more real than waking. Or a memory from childhood that doesn't align with anything you were told. These are fragments of the roughness, perhaps. The brush strokes that weren't smoothed out. And sometimes, something within us knows. It's why we cling to art, to myth, to stories, because part of us suspects we are living inside one. And if this world is a story, then who's reading it? Who wrote this draft? And if they erase it, will they mourn us? Or will we just vanish, still clutching our little joys and griefs as if they mattered? Here's a thought to lose sleep over. In your dreams, you live entire lives that disappear upon waking. You cry, die, suffer, and then forget. Your dreaming self doesn't know it's a draft. It believes. So, how sure are you that this version isn't the same? You may be a paragraph in a cosmic notebook, a sketch that accidentally developed emotion, a temporary character who believes he's the protagonist. And yet, if your love feels real, if your pain shapes who you are, if your choices still change something in you, then maybe that's the point. Maybe the draft is the story. Because sometimes, in art, the rough version is more powerful than the polished one. Sometimes the raw sketch reveals more truth than the finished painting. Sometimes the scribbled, imperfect line holds more emotion than the refined ink. Perhaps that's us. Perhaps we are the unfinished lines the universe drew and then hesitated to erase. So, if you ever feel like your life doesn't matter, that your world is too broken, too flawed to be meaningful, remember this. Even if this is a cosmic draft, it's still happening now. It still holds you, and that means you get to choose whether to treat it as temporary or to live as if it's eternal, because maybe, just maybe, the draft was the masterpiece all along, the compass that lies true. You're standing in the middle of a vast silent field, no signs, no trails, just open space in every direction. You hold a compass in your hand. It spins. It doesn't settle. There's no north. No true orientation. You could walk anywhere, and it would be neither right nor wrong. But you don't stand still. You pick a direction. You move. And strangely, after a while, it starts to feel like that path was always meant for you. This is the paradox of the compass that lies true. A silent truth wrapped in contradiction. When no direction is objectively better than another, conviction alone can make it real. In a world overflowing with uncertainty, we crave signs. Guidance, something, anything that tells us we're heading the right way. But what happens when there is no cosmic arrow? No divine whisper? No rational map? Just an endless plane of equal possibilities? Most would freeze. Some would wander aimlessly. But a rare few choose. Not because they know, but because they commit. And here's the enigma. That commitment doesn't just lead them down a path. It creates the path. It rewrites the terrain, as if belief itself pushes against the fabric of reality and shapes it into something navigable. What was once arbitrary becomes meaningful. But how? The answer is unnerving, because meaning doesn't wait for certainty. Meaning is made through choice. Take this example. Two people stand at the edge of a career decision. One has no clarity, no preference. The other picks arbitrarily, but then doubles down. Trains, builds, reframes every setback as destiny. Years later, that path becomes identity. And when asked how they knew which direction to go, they say, it just felt right. But it didn't. Not at first. What felt right came after the choice, not before it. Because clarity often arrives after commitment, not the other way around. The compass that lies true doesn't point north because north exists. It points where you decide to believe north is. And then, because you act on it, walk toward it, build around it, it becomes your north. And here's the paradox. Even though it began as a lie, it becomes a kind of truth. Not universal truth, not cosmic truth, but personal truth. The kind that organizes chaos, the kind that gives structure to the void, the kind that gets you moving when every direction is equal and meaningless. This isn't delusion. It's how humans survive the weight of infinite choice. Without conviction, you're paralyzed. With it, you rewrite your map. Now let's take it deeper. Think about morality. In many moments, right and wrong aren't clearly defined. They shift by culture, by context, by circumstance. But once you commit, once you decide what's right, you begin to see the world through that lens. You build a framework around your values, and that framework becomes your true north. But was it always true, or did you make it true by walking toward it? This is what philosophers call normative construction, the act of creating a norm by acting as if it's already valid. You move first, you believe second, and eventually, belief catches up. Reality seems to agree, and the same happens in relationships, in projects, in identity. You choose a direction, not because it's certain, but because you have to choose. And in choosing, you make it real. You sculpt the uncertain into the familiar. That's the power of conviction. But here's the danger. Conviction doesn't guarantee correctness. It only guarantees coherence. You can build an entire life around a belief that started as nothing more than a whim. And if you're not careful, you'll forget that you chose it. You'll start to think it was always waiting for you. That's how ideologies harden. How personal truths become dogma. How the compass that once saved you becomes the very thing that blinds you. Because the compass is yours. It isn't anchored in anything external. It becomes true only because you decided it should be. And if you mistake your invented north for the real one, you risk mistaking your path for the only path. So, how do we live with this? With humility. With the awareness that your direction may not be objectively better, only personally meaningful. With the realization that while conviction can create truth, it can also conceal other truths. But that doesn't mean it's not powerful. In fact, it may be the only thing more powerful than truth itself. The ability to move forward in the absence of it. So, the next time you feel lost, not lost in space, but in self, don't wait for a perfect sign. Don't ask for a map the universe never drew. Look down at the spinning compass in your palm. Understand it's empty, directionless, a blank instrument, and then pick a direction, any direction. Not because it's right, but because you'll make it right. Then walk. And in that act of walking, of moving, of believing, of continuing despite ambiguity, you'll feel the needle settle. You'll feel it point. Not to what is, but to what you've made, and it will feel true. Because sometimes the most powerful truths begin as beautiful lies we commit to until they become real. The travel without movement. Close your eyes, stay perfectly still, and now, remember the street where you grew up. The one with the cracked pavement and rust-colored leaves. Listen. A dog bark echoes down the lane. Someone laughs behind a screen door. You can smell the damp wood of the old fence. You feel it, don't you? The space. The time. As if you've returned. But you haven't moved an inch. This is travel without movement. It sounds poetic, mystical even, but it's real. Every time your awareness shifts, you experience it. A single song can take you back a decade. A dream can fling you into a world that doesn't exist. Grief can fold space until you feel the presence of someone long gone. A single scent can collapse miles and years in an instant. Your body is still, but your mind has moved galaxies. This isn't just imagination. It's a fundamental collapse of what we assume space is. We've been taught that travel requires distance, that motion needs momentum. But what if the real landscape isn't out there? What if space, as you experience it, is constructed entirely inside your mind? Think about déjà vu, that eerie sense that you've been here before. It doesn't matter if you're in a new city or a new conversation. For a second, everything feels familiar, spatial logic collapses, and something deeper, older, takes over. The architecture of your awareness redraws the map, if only for a breath. We think of space as external, tangible, but try defining a mile without referencing your memory of walking it. Try feeling a room without using your own presence as the reference point. Every measurement begins with the self, and the self, it's not fixed in one place. It shifts, it stretches, it remembers. This is why, when you lose yourself in music, you feel like you've drifted somewhere else. Why meditation can make you feel infinite. Why trauma can trap you in places your body never revisits. The mind doesn't care about physics. It travels not through space, but through meaning, through sensation, through story. Consider the astronaut floating in orbit, tethered by science, suspended above Earth. Now compare them to a prisoner, alone in a cell, revisiting every corner of their childhood home in memory. Which one has traveled farther? Physically, it's clear, but spiritually? Psychologically? It's not so simple. You don't need a road to journey. You need a shift. A shift in awareness is a form of motion, and sometimes it's more real than the physical kind, because physical travel can still leave you numb. You can fly across continents and feel nothing, but a single memory can break you open. A single moment of clarity can stretch eternity into a second. What matters isn't where your body is. It's what your mind is doing with the space around it. This is why some people feel like they have lived 1,000 lives without ever leaving their town, and others travel the world and feel empty at every destination, because movement is not the same as meaning, and meaning isn't found in motion. It's found in presence, in perception. The mystics knew this. They spoke of inner worlds, of sacred stillness, of reaching divine places without moving their feet. They weren't speaking metaphorically. They understood that the deepest journeys happen not across landscapes, but within consciousness. A monk in stillness, a child lost in imagination, a dreamer staring into the dark, all traveling, all moving, all crossing dimensions with no ticket, no map, no vehicle, just the silent permission to go inward. And sometimes, the most intense journeys come uninvited. A panic attack that makes a room feel endless, a flash of nostalgia that makes you weep, a sudden insight that redraws your entire worldview in an instant. These are not passive moments. These are collisions between your awareness and the illusion of distance, because maybe there is no distance. Maybe space is the illusion, and maybe, just maybe, your consciousness is not in space. Space is in your consciousness. You're not inside the world. The world is inside your perception, and that changes everything. So the next time you feel trapped, stuck, unmoving, remember this. Stillness is not stagnation. Stillness is a portal. One breath, one thought. One memory can send you across an ocean of feeling, across a lifetime of experience, without ever leaving the room. You do not have to move to go far. You do not have to leave to arrive, because the true journey is not about motion. It's about transformation. And sometimes the most powerful kind begins when everything else goes still. The masked emotion reversal. What if pretending wasn't just a game, but a transformation? What if the very act of faking a feeling could rewrite your internal world so thoroughly that your brain stopped knowing the difference? That's the paradox of the masked emotion reversal. When you wear an emotion long enough, whether out of necessity, performance, or survival, your brain sometimes stops pretending and starts believing. Not as a conscious choice, but as a neurological surrender. The mask becomes the face. This is not speculation. It is a documented psychological and physiological truth. When actors prepare for a role, many report something uncanny. The emotions they are merely simulating begin to feel real. Their heartbeat changes. Their breath alters. Their internal monologue shifts, and the longer they hold the character, the harder it becomes to exit. Some call it method acting gone too far, but it's more fundamental than that. It's biology responding to narrative, a brain that can't help but sync itself with the story it's telling, even when that story was meant to be fake. Take the facial feedback hypothesis. It proposes something unsettling, that the expression on your face can actually change the emotions you feel. If you force yourself to smile, your brain may release neurotransmitters associated with happiness. Not because you are happy, but because your nervous system interprets the muscle configuration as a cue. This is what we do when we feel joy. The body leads, the mind follows, and eventually, the line between pretending and feeling disappears. Now, amplify that to deeper emotional states: anger, love, grief. Suppose you fake confidence for a week straight, walking tall, making bold choices, smiling at risk. At first, it feels like armor, performance. But after days or weeks, something odd happens. The armor doesn't feel heavy anymore. It feels like skin. And worse, you forget it wasn't always yours. That's the reversal. What began as artifice becomes internalized. Consider the implications for trauma. Imagine someone pretending to be okay, not for show, but for protection. Smiling to avoid questions, laughing to keep others comfortable. After a while, they may forget where the pain lives. They've buried it so well that even they can't find it. Until one day, a small crack, an unexpected silence, a familiar song shatters the mask. And suddenly, the emotions they forgot they were faking come flooding back. Not as ghosts, as reality. Because the brain didn't delete them. It rewrote them. On the other end, think of healing. People sometimes repeat affirmations. I am strong, I am calm, I am safe. Not because they believe them, but because they want to. And the repetition isn't magic. It's neurological brute force, a form of rehearsal so persistent that the brain starts to lay down new emotional pathways. You say it long enough, feel it faintly enough, and one day, you're not pretending anymore. There's a deeper philosophical horror here. If pretending something can make it real, then how do you know any of your feelings were ever authentic? How much of what you are is performance that hardened into truth? Did you choose your identity, or did you rehearse it into existence? If someone smiles every day because they're told to and ends up feeling happy, was that happiness real or just the result of long-term emotional gaslighting by the self? Now imagine a society that rewards certain emotions. In customer service, in corporate roles, in education, we are told to be upbeat, calm, motivated. And over time, these masks don't come off. They become the default settings. People wake up one day unable to cry, unable to feel anger, unable to name the exact moment when the play became the person. Not because they suppressed their emotions, but because they rewrote them with enough consistency that the original feelings were overwritten like an old file on a hard drive. But the reversal cuts both ways. Imagine someone faking cruelty, sarcasm, indifference. They say it's a joke, a persona, but years later, they've grown bitter, detached. They can't remember how to say something sincerely. They forgot they were pretending. Because the brain doesn't track truth versus lie. It tracks repetition, pattern. Whatever you feed it becomes its reality. Even language reflects this. We say things like, fake it till you make it, unaware that we are invoking neurological programming. We tell people to act confident, to pretend to love, to smile through pain, not realizing that each of these is a line in the code, and enough repetition rewrites the operating system. In neuroscience, this is mirrored in Hebbian learning. Neurons that fire together wire together. The more frequently a circuit is activated, whether for real emotion or a fake one, the stronger it becomes. And if you repeatedly activate an emotional response, the brain strengthens that emotional signature, regardless of whether it began in truth or fiction. So, what does this mean for the soul? It means your internal reality may not be a mirror of your authentic self. It may be a sculpture, shaped by repetition, performance, and necessity. It means every emotion you perform has the potential to infect the real. It means the boundary between sincerity and simulation is not guarded by truth, but by habit. This is the paradox. The actor becomes the character. The faker becomes the believer. The performance becomes the person. And maybe that's the most terrifying thing of all, that you could slowly become a stranger to yourself, not through trauma or damage, but through practice. So, the next time you smile through pain, fake calm in chaos, or pretend to love something you secretly hate, ask yourself, how many more times can I rehearse this before it becomes who I am? Because the mask doesn't always come off. Sometimes it grows roots. The threadbare memory cloak. What if your most precious memories never really happened? Not in the way you remember them. Not with the same details, not with the same colors, not with the same emotions. You see, memory isn't a vault. It's not a photograph frozen in time. It's a living thread, woven and rewoven every time you reach for it. And each time you do, it frays, it stretches, it shifts, until one day it's no longer the moment you lived, just the echo of how you once recalled it. This is the Threadbare memory cloak. We wear it every day, draped over our minds like something comforting, something warm. But over time, as we reach into the past again and again, what we're touching isn't the event itself, but the memory of the last memory, a copy of a copy, a reflection of a reflection, until eventually the truth beneath it is gone. Think back to your earliest memory. Maybe it's your mother's voice, the sound of rain hitting the window, a birthday cake, the smell of a classroom. You can see it, can't you? Maybe even feel it. But how many times have you recalled it? Dozens? Hundreds? Over the years, it's become polished, smoothed, maybe even idealized. But the original moment, the real one, may have been nothing like it. Neuroscience confirms this. Every time we recall a memory, our brain doesn't pull it from storage. It reconstructs it, actively, piece by piece, like an artist repainting the same portrait again and again. And when the painting is done, it doesn't get returned unchanged. It replaces the original. The new version overwrites the old. So each memory is not preserved. It is edited, sculpted by time, emotion, repetition, trauma, and desire. And in that process, it starts to lie, but not intentionally, not maliciously. The lies of memory are soft, subtle. They come in whispers, a face slightly altered, a phrase someone never said, a gesture added for meaning, a moment that felt longer than it was, or shorter. You once cried under a tree, but maybe the tree was a lamppost. Maybe the tears were not about love, but shame. Maybe the person who held your hand wasn't there at all. This is not fiction. This is how the brain works. The hippocampus, the center of memory, is not a librarian. It's a storyteller. And stories change, especially the ones we tell ourselves. And this matters more than we think, because our identities are built on memory. Who we are, what we believe, what we fear, what we long for. These are not just biological patterns. They are shaped by what we remember, or think we remember. And if those memories are flawed, what does that make us? Imagine you've held on to a moment your entire life. A teacher who humiliated you, a friend who betrayed you, a partner who saved you. But what if the humiliation wasn't personal? What if the betrayal was imagined? What if the partner wasn't really kind, but you just needed them to be? Then what? Then your grief, your love, your story is based on shadows. This is not to say memory is meaningless. No, quite the opposite. It means memory is dangerously powerful because it feels real, even when it isn't. It guides your decisions, fuels your emotions, shapes your relationships, and when you revisit a memory, you're not just reliving, you're rewriting. You are the author and the editor, the witness and the forger. That's the cloak. Soft at first, familiar. But wear it long enough, and it thins. It tears. It stops warming you, and begins misleading you. You believe you're wrapped in truth, but all that's left is threadbare fabric, the shape of a moment, hollow at the core. But here's the cruel elegance of the paradox. Even knowing this, we need memory. We need the illusion of a consistent past to survive the present. We need stories of origin, of who wronged us, of who loved us, of where we fell. Because in the absence of memory, there is no narrative, no continuity, only now. And now is too fragile to hold the weight of identity alone. So we cling to the cloak. Even as it falls apart, we tell the same story again and again, not because it's true, but because it's all we have. And sometimes, because we want it to be true. A lost love becomes eternal. A mistake becomes justified. A failure becomes fate. In a way, this is beautiful. It means we are artists of the past. We color it not as it was, but as we needed it to be. And maybe, just maybe, that gives us a strange kind of freedom, to imagine healing where there was only pain, to create heroes out of the ones who left us, to turn tragedy into transformation. But we must also be careful, because in rewriting memory, we risk rewriting ourselves too far. We can lose the raw truth, the ugly honesty, the uncomfortable realness that shaped us, and in its place, fiction. Convenient, comforting fiction. So, the next time you remember something, really remember it, pause. Ask yourself, is this the memory? Or the memory of the memory? Did it happen this way? Or did I make it feel this way because I needed it to? The truth may be lost, but awareness is not. To recognize the threadbare cloak for what it is the first thread you pull when unraveling the illusion. And maybe, just maybe, what's underneath it is not emptiness, but something more honest, something fragile, something real, even if it's not the memory you wanted. The deathless moment paradox. You will never experience your own death. Let that settle for a moment. Not as an idea, but as a reality. No matter how you imagine it, you will never witness the end of your own consciousness. Others may see it. Others will mourn. But for you, the lights never truly go out. There is no final breath you get to reflect upon. No slow fade into black that you are present to describe. One moment, you are. The next, you are not. But you never get to cross the threshold with awareness. That moment belongs to everyone else, but never to you. And that simple fact opens a paradox. One that reshapes the way you think about existence, about finality, about time itself. If your life is made of moments, millions of them strung together, and if death is the one moment you cannot experience, then from your point of view, does your life ever really end? Or does it stretch endlessly forward, forever bracketed by moments you can feel and never by the one you can't? You live each second expecting that one day you'll meet death face to face, but you won't. Because the instant death arrives, you are no longer there to know it. Consciousness doesn't include its own cancellation. You can't observe your own non-existence. You can't narrate your final chapter. And this leads to a disturbing, beautiful, haunting truth. Your entire life may be a deathless loop of awareness, because from the inside, there is no end. This is the deathless moment paradox. From the perspective of everyone else, your life is a line, with a beginning and a very definite end. They will attend your funeral. They will mark a date. They will tell stories about who you were, but you will never witness that closure. The world will continue after you're gone, but your mind will never carry that knowledge. Your death happens to others, not to you. This sounds impossible, but consider this. You've already experienced this on a smaller scale. Think of sleep. Every night you vanish into unconsciousness, but you never witness the precise moment when sleep overtakes you. There's no timestamp in your awareness. You don't feel yourself cease to exist. You only notice the return. Awareness begins again, and time skips forward. You never felt the ending. Just like death. And that's what makes this paradox so powerful. Imagine a book with no last page. You read each word, turn each sheet, and somewhere, someone assures you that the final page exists, but you will never see it. The book, for you, is always one page longer. And when the last one finally arrives, your eyes will not be there to read it. This illusion that death is a thing we personally encounter is so deeply ingrained that we rarely question it. But think about it carefully. Every death you've known was someone else's. You've seen the ends of other stories, but yours? Yours is always just a little further away. Until one day, it's not. But you'll never be there to know that moment has come. Now ask yourself, if the end is never felt, never known, does it exist from your point of view? It's like reaching the edge of a cliff in a dream, but waking up before you fall. Again, and again, and again, you never hit the ground. Only others can say you fell, but for you, the story cuts before the drop. This creates an eerie sense of immortality, not the kind where your body survives forever, but the kind where your experience never includes its own conclusion. From inside your mind, your life is the only continuous thing you'll ever know. It expands forward endlessly, not because it literally lasts forever, but because it never contains its own end. That final moment, the great unknown, is permanently invisible from within, and this changes everything. If death cannot be part of your lived experience, then life is always now, always here, always happening. You are permanently locked inside a stream of moments that never includes the moment after life. You may fear death, you may think of it, but you'll never meet it in the flesh. It is the door you can never watch close, the silence you will never hear, the nothing you will never feel. Let's go deeper. This paradox invites strange possibilities. Some theorists have speculated that the brain, in its final flickers, might stretch time, extend moments to infinity within collapsing neural loops. Near-death experiences often describe timelessness, floating, a sensation of eternal presence. If the brain, in its dying second, loops awareness endlessly to avoid the end, then subjectively, you never die. Your consciousness clings to one last moment and stretches it into eternity. It wouldn't matter that the outside world sees your body stop. Inside, you're locked in a never-ending fragment, one final second blooming forever. And if that's true, then maybe you are already there. Maybe this very moment is the final breath stretched across subjective eternity. Maybe you are already experiencing the last fragment, and it just never feels like it ends. But even if that's not the case, even if death simply shuts everything off without drama, the paradox remains. You will never be conscious of your own erasure. And so, your story is always open from the inside. You carry the illusion of continuity forward because your mind cannot conceive of its own absence. You imagine an ending, but you never arrive there. You fear it, but you never stand within it. And so your life becomes an unbroken chain of presence, no matter what the world outside eventually claims. This is not immortality in the traditional sense. You will die, your body will decay, your name will be whispered and then forgotten. But your awareness, your felt experience, never includes the death part. You vanish before the end reaches you, and so you live in a deathless timeline, not eternal in duration, but eternal in structure, a loop of now, a film reel that never shows its final frame. Others will mourn you, others will mark the date, but to you, death never happens, not even once. So the next time you stare into the darkness and wonder how it all ends, remember, from your point of view, it doesn't. You are here. You are always here. This moment, this breath, this heartbeat, this is all you will ever truly know. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. The half-seen continuity. Time feels like a river, doesn't it? Smooth, flowing, unbroken, a steady current from memory to moment. You wake, you eat, you work, you dream. And somehow, it all strings together into a coherent story called your life. But what if that flow isn't real? What if the sensation of time is just your brain stitching together snapshots? What if everything you think of as now, then, and next is a hallucinated thread pulled tight between otherwise isolated beads? This is the hidden machinery behind what we call the half-seen continuity, the illusion that your life is unfolding in a seamless timeline, when in fact, it's more like a slideshow, desperately edited in real time. The brain can only take in fragments, bits, sensory data, a face here, a sound there, a motion, a memory. But none of it arrives in one continuous stream. Instead, your consciousness is constantly filling in gaps, guessing, smoothing, faking continuity where none exists. Think of watching a movie. You know it's just a rapid sequence of still frames. But when projected fast enough, your mind sees motion. A man walking, a car exploding, a tear falling. But those aren't real movements. They're your brain interpreting one image to the next and believing there's a bridge in between. Now, scale that up to your entire life. You don't remember every second. You remember scattered flashes, and yet you feel like you've been here every step of the way, as if some inner narrator kept the story flowing. That's not memory. That's stitching. Scientists have found that consciousness itself might operate on pulses, on momentary bursts of awareness separated by microseconds of blackout. That means what you call the present might actually be a stitched-together patchwork of tiny instants your brain refuses to show you individually. It wants you to see the quilt, not the torn threads. But what if the stitching failed? What if, even briefly, your brain couldn't link the frames? Couldn't create the illusion of motion, continuity, identity? You'd fall into something terrifying. Not unconsciousness, not sleep, but fragmentation. You'd open your eyes and not remember why. You'd feel a feeling and not know what caused it. You'd speak, but the sentence would fall apart mid-breath. Not because of illness, but because your sense of before and after would vanish. This is what some trauma survivors describe, a moment so intense it snaps continuity, Suddenly, you're watching life like flashes through broken glass. The stitching skips. You float between scenes. And when it returns, time feels alien, wrong, disjointed. But it's not just trauma. Even in everyday life, tiny glitches happen. You walk into a room and forget why. You finish reading a page and realize you remember none of it. You blink and feel like something jumped. That isn't just forgetfulness. That's the stitching snagging for a second. The half-seen continuity reminds us of a terrifying truth. Your life only feels like a single line because your brain works tirelessly to forge that line out of chaos. It's not passive, it's work. Think of dreams. In dreams, time slips. You're in your childhood bedroom, then suddenly you're underwater. Then, in a city that doesn't exist, and somehow, it makes sense. Why? Because your dream brain doesn't bother stitching. It just offers flashes, and your sleeping mind accepts them. That dream logic, that surreal scatter of instants, is probably what raw reality looks like before the brain edits it. Dreams are the backstage. Consciousness is the polished stage show. But what if you saw both? What if you became aware of the stitching itself? The needle, the seams, the gaps. Mystics, meditators, and psychonauts have tried. Some say they felt time collapse, not stretch, not pause, but disintegrate. No more flow, only frames. Moments suspended in nothing. Not terrifying, not peaceful, just separate. Some call it enlightenment, others call it ego death. But stripped of spiritual terms, it may simply be this: awareness without stitching. Seeing each moment as it is, unglued to the one before it, free, but ungrounded. And that raises a question. Is continuity comfort or illusion? Do we need the thread to feel alive? Or is the thread the lie that keeps us from seeing the truth? If you knew your memories were random snapshots, your future, a blur, and your present, a flicker held together by sheer will, would you still feel like yourself? Or would you realize the self is not a solid timeline, but a trembling story constantly being rewritten by an editor you can't see? This is the mystery of the half-seen continuity. And perhaps the most humbling part is this: your entire life, your identity, your purpose, your story, only exists because your brain refuses to let go of the lie. It insists that there's a beginning, a middle, and an end, that there is momentum, that there is you. But behind that is silence, stillness, and a scatter of disconnected instants, just waiting to be joined. The extinguished flame of self. There is a moment in deep anesthesia. You're counting down, 10, 9, 8, and then nothing. No dream, no thought, no sensation, just a blankness that doesn't feel like darkness, because even darkness has texture. It's not even sleep, because sleep has moments, half dreams, drifting thoughts, a sense of time, but in deep anesthesia, there's nothing. Not even the absence of something. No you, no world. And then you wake, as if no time passed at all. One moment you were, the next you are again. But the space in between, it never existed for you. No bridge, no thread, no flicker of continuity. This is the extinguished flame of self. Because if you can be fully gone, fully unconscious, and not even know it, then what is this you speak of with such confidence? If the light of awareness can go completely out and then come back on without you noticing it went dark, how real is the continuity of your identity? You say you're the same person who went to sleep last night, but you weren't there to witness the passing hours. You were gone. The world could have ended and restarted, and when you opened your eyes, you would have believed it had been one continuous line, one self. But it wasn't. It was a restart, not of the body, but of the mind, of consciousness, of the story of you. We like to think of the self as a candle flame, always burning, but it's more like a match, struck again and again, and each time we forget the gap between the flames. The darkness that held nothing, not even the memory of being gone. This isn't just theory. It happens every night. You sleep, you vanish, you return. You never question it. But imagine this. What if someone else woke up in your bed with your memories, your voice, your habits? How would you know it wasn't you? You wouldn't. Because you don't experience continuity. You assume it. An assumption feels like truth only because it's smooth. It doesn't jolt us. But anesthesia shows the fault line. It shows that awareness can be extinguished entirely, without fanfare, without witness. And when it returns, it pretends nothing happened. But something did. You disappeared. Not metaphorically, literally. There was no you to experience anything. Just a paused machine, a dark screen. So what is the self if it can be paused? Is it a memory loop, a narration, a glitchless resume of identity? Or is it just a fragile flicker of attention, briefly lit, easily snuffed, always pretending it never went out? Think of people with retrograde amnesia. Their memories stop at a certain point. Everything beyond that, gone. But they don't cease to exist. They build a new self with what's left. What does that say about who we really are? Maybe the self isn't a flame at all. Maybe it's a trick of light, a continuity effect, like frames in a movie. If you play them fast enough, you see motion. But in between each frame, there's nothing, just the illusion of time, of consistency. You are not continuous, you are convincing. And that illusion is necessary, because the alternative is too terrifying, that you are reborn every time you wake, that the you who closed your eyes yesterday no longer exists, that life isn't a line, it's a flickering slideshow. And the slideshow forgets that it ever paused. But perhaps there's something beautiful in that, because if the self isn't solid, if it's just a moment-to-moment emergence, then it's also free to shift, to rebuild, to dissolve old identities and emerge as something new. If the flame of consciousness can be extinguished, then it can also be relit. And maybe that's the point. Not to cling to a permanent identity, but to honor each awakening as a miracle, to recognize that every return is a resurrection. And every time your eyes open, it is not the world that resumes. It is you, reigniting into being, as if for the first time. You don't continue. You restart. Again and again. And the beauty is, you never notice the death between those moments, only the light that returns. And maybe that's enough. The brick of conditional truth. What if your deepest belief about who you are, what the world means, what is right, what is real, wasn't a pillar but a brick in a wall, and not even the bottom brick? Just one part of a larger structure held together by invisible assumptions, layered memories, and social cement. The brick of conditional truth is the idea that no belief stands alone. Each one leans on others, and when just one critical brick is removed, the whole structure collapses. Not with drama, but with a quiet, shattering emptiness. And the terrifying part? You often don't know which brick is load-bearing until it's gone. Take a moment and try this. Think of a belief you hold with complete confidence, something central. Maybe it's a moral principle, like people are inherently good, or a scientific certainty, like the universe had a beginning, or something personal, like my memories are accurate. Now, try to trace why you believe it, not just the surface reasons, but the foundation. What is this belief resting on? Where did it come from? Why does it feel solid? Most people can't answer that completely. And that's not a failure. That's how belief works. It's not a single brick. It's a wall, a system, a mesh of reinforcements. You trust one idea because it fits well with others. You believe a memory because it aligns with your sense of identity. You believe a scientific model because it has predictive power and because other models failed. You believe your partner loves you not just because they say it, but because it matches countless other micro-signals. The way they touch your hand, the way they text you when they land safely, the way they notice when your tone shifts by a single syllable. But what happens when a single foundational belief is proven false? It feels like a minor fracture at first, a brick removed, a little dust. But if that belief was load-bearing, if it was silently holding up the others, then everything above it begins to shudder. And one by one, the bricks start to loosen. A fact you once accepted becomes suspect. A memory you trusted starts to blur. An identity you wore comfortably begins to itch. And before you can brace yourself, the collapse is underway. This is how people lose faith. Not suddenly, but through one undermined brick. A priest says something cruel. A fact in a textbook is revealed to be misrepresented. A trusted person lies once, and suddenly, everything they said before, everything you believed with ease, feels hollow. Not because the other truths were disproven, but because the structure that made them feel true is gone. This is also how people fall into conspiracy. They lose trust in a system, and suddenly the beliefs that once felt absurd, unthinkable, start to make emotional sense, because the old wall is gone and a new one is being built, brick by brick, not based on facts, but on alignment, on structure, on emotional coherence. We all think we build our beliefs from truth upward, but in reality, most of us build sideways, from the comfort of familiar bricks. If an idea feels like it fits the wall, we accept it faster. If it clashes, we test it harder, or discard it without even noticing. And this is not stupidity. It's not weakness. It's neurological efficiency, pattern recognition. The brain doesn't look for isolated truths, it looks for truth systems. That's why cults work. That's why ideologies endure. They offer not a fact, but a framework. And once you're inside, every brick you add reinforces the ones beneath it. But now, imagine a person who starts removing bricks. Not randomly, but deliberately. They question their education, their political allegiance, their inherited culture, their deepest psychological patterns. And as the wall trembles, they feel what many cannot admit: terror, because we don't fear losing a belief. We fear what happens when the scaffolding of meaning disappears. And yet, there's beauty in collapse. When one wall falls, another space opens. Not always immediately. Sometimes there's only rubble, silence, disorientation. But then a new structure begins. New bricks appear, carefully chosen, less blind, more examined. And you begin to rebuild. Not a fortress this time, but maybe a bridge. Something flexible. Something that doesn't need to be absolute to be trusted. The philosopher Quine called this the web of belief. Each belief is a node, a strand. Some are on the edge and can be plucked or removed with little damage, but some, closer to the center, are deeply entangled. You tug one, and the vibrations ripple outward. It's elegant, but it's also fragile. In real life, people experience this fragility in waves: the death of a loved one you prayed to save, the scientific discovery that invalidates your life's work, the realization that your childhood memories were filtered through trauma. Each one is a hand reaching into the wall and pulling out a brick you thought you couldn't live without. And then, you live, and that's the quiet truth beneath this paradox, that while beliefs can collapse, people often don't. We bend, we grieve, we reconstruct. The wall may fall, but the builder survives. Still, you'll never look at your beliefs the same way again. You'll feel the mortar, the pressure, the hidden dependencies, and you'll start to wonder, which of these bricks are mine? Which were handed to me? Which are hiding something I no longer want to support? And most terrifying of all, what will happen if this one is removed? Not all beliefs need to last forever. Some were meant to collapse, some were walls built around you, and some, once fallen, reveal the sky. The preemptive regret loop. What if you could feel sorrow for something that never even happened? Not after the fact, not because of a consequence, but before the choice is even made, before the moment unfolds, before you know how it ends. You sit in silence, and already the grief arrives. This is the preemptive regret loop. It's the paradox of experiencing regret in advance, a haunting echo from a future you haven't lived, but already fear. You stand at a crossroads, and before you even move, the sorrow begins. As if your soul is already apologizing for a decision it hasn't yet made. You feel the weight of the wrong choice, even when you haven't chosen anything at all. Imagine a person offered two paths: stay in their hometown with family, or leave for a distant city to chase a dream. Neither is right or wrong, but as they sit with the decision, regret leaks into both timelines. If they stay, they imagine all the ambitions that will go unfulfilled. If they leave, they imagine the dinners missed, the aging parents, the warmth they'll abandon. They haven't taken a single step, and yet the ache is already there, a sorrow for a life unlived, a future loss mourned in advance. And this is where the loop begins, because that sorrow becomes part of the decision-making. And then the fear of future regret begins shaping the present. You start avoiding choices, not because they're wrong, but because you fear the possibility of regretting them later. So you hesitate, you delay, you stay still, hoping that inaction will shield you. But even in inaction, regret finds you. You begin to regret not choosing, not speaking, not risking, not acting. And the loop tightens. You regret what you might have done. and you regret that you didn't. Both lives, the one lived and the one imagined, begin to ache in parallel. Like twin ghosts whispering what could have beens through every quiet hour, preemptive regret isn't hypothetical. Neuroscience shows us that the brain doesn't always distinguish imagined pain from real pain. If you visualize failure, betrayal, loss, your body reacts, your heart races, your stomach tightens, your mood shifts, your brain burns energy on realities that haven't happened, and maybe never will. It's the cost of being able to simulate the future, a gift and a curse. We evolved to anticipate outcomes, to avoid mistakes, to survive. But now, we use that same machinery to torture ourselves. You scroll past someone's profile and imagine what dating them might be like. Then you imagine the heartbreak, the silence, the goodbye text. You regret the pain before the love ever began. You consider starting a project, writing a book, changing careers, and already you feel the disappointment of failure. You regret the energy you might waste, the judgment you might receive. So you stop, you pull back, you bury the idea, and yet the regret stays, because now you carry the sorrow of never knowing. The question of what if becomes heavier than any failure could have been. This is the cruel elegance of the preemptive regret loop. It's the emotional equivalent of bracing for impact when nothing is coming, and the act of bracing becomes the pain itself. You live in the shadows of futures that never arrive, and it's exhausting. But here's the twist. The loop thrives in silence, in stillness, in secrecy. It feeds on unspoken fears and unlived possibilities. But the moment you act, something changes. Not because regret disappears, but because it becomes earned. There is a strange dignity in regretting something you tried, in grieving a love you lived, in mourning a choice you made, not one you only feared. When you regret something real, you learn. When you regret something imagined, you only bleed. So the question becomes, are you willing to risk the pain of a real mistake to escape the infinite ache of none at all? Because at some point, the fear of regret becomes more dangerous than regret itself. You may never know if the choice was right. You may carry sorrow either way. But only one path gives you a story to tell, a scar you understand, a lesson written in action, not anxiety. You will regret. That is part of being alive. But you get to decide what you regret, the risks you took, or the silence you kept. So, if you find yourself caught in the loop, fearing a choice, dreading a future that hasn't arrived, mourning a consequence that doesn't yet exist, pause and ask yourself this: am I grieving the truth? Or just the ghost of a life I never allowed myself to live? The loop ends where action begins. Not because it guarantees peace, but because it gives shape to the pain, a shape you can face, learn from, and eventually forgive. So take the step, say the thing, risk the failure, let the regret be real, because imaginary sorrow is infinite, but lived sorrow has an ending, and from that ending, you grow. The probability wave persona. You aren't a single person. Not yet. You are a haze, a ripple, a probability wave stretched across endless versions of who you could become. 1 minute, you're confident. The next, you're riddled with doubt. You're kind to a stranger, then cold to someone you love. You hesitate, you leap, you retreat. And each of these contradictions is not a flaw. They're the echo of quantum identity, the you that exists before a decision is made. In physics, a particle doesn't exist in just one place until it's observed. It exists in many. It spreads out, not as a thing, but as probability. A wave of potential locations collapsed into one reality only when something, someone, looks at it. You, in many ways, are no different. Your personality isn't static. Your future isn't fixed. Until you choose, you remain a cloud of possibilities. Versions of yourself that compete, interfere, blend. But the moment you decide, the moment you act, that wave collapses. And one version of you becomes real. The others vanish into the unchosen. This is the probability wave persona, the idea that your identity isn't a single point, but a shifting waveform of might-be's. The truth is, most of the time, you don't notice this. You assume you are yourself, consistent and defined, but every meaningful choice reveals just how unstable that self really is. Consider this. You're offered a chance to move to a new city. In that instant, two versions of you split. One packs up, one stays. One reinvents, one clings to the familiar. And in the space before the choice, both versions are real. You feel the anxiety of the one who leaves, the safety of the one who stays, the hope of the risk-taker, the caution of the doubter. All of them flicker within you. You are not either one. You are the field between them. Until the choice, until the collapse. This is not metaphor. This is how identity truly works. Your mind doesn't flow like a river. It branches like a tree. At every moment, tiny forks split off. Versions of you who answered the call or ignored it. Who forgave, who didn't, who turned left instead of right. And you carry the quantum residue of all these yous. You are haunted by the selves you might have been. Inspired by the ones you still could become. Terrified by the ones you almost were. We treat identity like a solid statue, but in truth, it's a superposition, a storm of echoes. You are the sum of competing impulses and imagined futures, and every decision you make is a measurement, a collapse. One possible self becomes you, and the others die quietly, unheard, but not forgotten. You feel them sometimes, don't you? That strange melancholy over lives you never lived, that quiet grief over doors you didn't open. It's not imagination, it's quantum memory. You remember your other selves, not as facts, but as ghosts. Regret, curiosity, longing. These are just the emotional fingerprints of collapsed identity waves. They linger like static. They remind you that you are not just who you are, but who you could have been. And this opens a deeper question. If you are always many, if you are a probability cloud that only becomes real in the moment of decision, then who are you really? Are you the wave, or are you the collapse? The answer may be both. You are the field of all that's possible. But the world only meets one version of you at a time. And this tension, that you contain multitudes, yet present only one, is the source of so much human pain. We feel trapped in the choices we made. We say, I'm just not that kind of person. But that's not true. You were, you could be, you still are. The wave didn't vanish, it just receded into potential. Let's take it further. Think of your identity not as a biography, but as an active experiment. You are collapsing waveforms every day, some conscious, some automatic. When you speak kindly to someone, that's one version of you taking shape. When you lash out, that's another. Neither is more real. Both were part of your cloud. You just observed one into being. You acted. And now, that version leaves a footprint. This is why change feels so impossible. Because we've collapsed into ourselves so many times, we think we're fixed, but we're not. The wave is still active. You can choose again. You can collapse differently. You can rewrite the narrative, not by erasing the past, but by becoming something new in the next observation. You've felt this, haven't you? In those rare moments when you break pattern, when you speak a truth you were afraid to say, when you finally leave the job, or the relationship, or the silence. In that moment, you aren't just changing your life. You are collapsing a different version of yourself into being. You're saying, this is who I am now, and the universe listens. But this comes with a cost, because every time you become something, you betray everything you didn't choose. Identity is murder, the murder of potential. And with every collapse, you feel the weight of what was lost. Not because it was better, but because it was yours, because it lived briefly inside you, and died unnoticed. You are not alone in this. Everyone you meet is a waveform too. That person who hurt you, they could have been kind. That friend who disappeared, they could have stayed. That version of you that forgave instead of hardened, still flickering in some emotional corner of your mind. We are all walking through a storm of might-have-beens, pretending to be solid. But here's the hope buried in the paradox. If your identity is not fixed, if you are a probability wave, then you are never truly stuck. You are not your past collapses. You are not the worst version that happened. You are the field, the cloud. And that means you can choose again. You can collapse differently. You can become the version of you that steps out of the haze into clarity, into choice, into becoming. The world sees only what you choose, but inside, the wave still waits. So the next time you stand on the edge of a decision, remember, you are a storm of potential. You are not a finished story. You are a question still being asked, and the answer is always up to you. The mosaic of forgotten selves. Close your eyes and think back to who you were 10 years ago. Not just what you looked like, but how you thought, what you feared, what you wanted so badly you were willing to break for it. Now go further back. 15 years, 20. The faces shift, the values shift, and something strange happens. You realize those versions of you might as well have been strangers. Yet, you remember them as if they were you. This is the quiet enigma of what we call the mosaic of forgotten selves. The eerie reality that over a lifetime, you aren't one person evolving. You are dozens of people, stitched into a single timeline, all wearing your name. We talk about life as a journey, as if oneself simply matures like a growing tree. But that's a myth. The truth is sharper. You shed selves. You abandon versions of yourself like snakeskins. Some fall off slowly. Others are torn away overnight. And yet, your memory treats them as one continuous person. That illusion is necessary, because if the mind didn't merge all those past yous into a single identity, you'd feel like a shattered archive of personalities. You'd wake up not knowing which one you were supposed to be today. But let's take a closer look. There was a version of you once who swore you'd never forgive someone, and then, years later, you forgave. There was a self who dreamed of one future, and then you laughed at that future. There was a younger you who defined love differently, who judged others more, or perhaps less, who held truths you now find absurd. So, were those selves wrong? Or are you wrong now? This is where the mosaic becomes haunting, because every new self you become doesn't just add to the picture. It quietly rewrites the memory of who you were. It edits, reinterprets, repaints, until your past feels like a straight path, even though it was jagged and wild. But buried beneath your current self are layers, forgotten goals, outdated fears, extinct obsessions, versions of you that once felt immortal in their purpose, and now you barely remember what they wanted, yet you carry the consequences of their choices, the debts, the scars, the irreversible steps. This is the haunting contract of identity. You inherit the aftermath of people you no longer are, and worse, you make choices today that your future selves may come to regret. It's like being in a relay race where each runner has a different goal, but they all wear the same uniform. You run full speed toward what feels right, only for the next runner to curse your direction. But you'll never meet them. You'll just become them. So who is the real you? The child, the rebel, the lover, the skeptic, the healer? They all felt real at the time. They all believed they were permanent. They weren't. Maybe there is no single you, only a procession, a shifting congregation of temporary selves, pretending they're the final version. But none of them are. And this raises a terrifying thought. If your current self is just one tile in a mosaic you can't fully see, how much should you trust your own convictions? If the person you are now might one day be dismantled, your beliefs tossed aside, your priorities rewritten, how do you anchor? How do you live when every decade burns the map of the last? Some respond by clinging tighter. They build rigid identities. They say, "This is who I am," like it's a fortress. But that fortress will crack, because life erodes everything that isn't flexible. Others embrace fluidity. They allow change. They know that every self is temporary. They treat identity not as a stone tablet, but as a draft in motion. These people aren't lost. They're honest. Because deep down, we all feel it. A subtle vertigo when we look back at who we used to be. A ghost-like awareness that someone else once lived in our skin. Someone who wouldn't recognize the life we live now. And yet, they were us. And that means we are not a single being walking a path. We are the path. We are the mosaic. The assembled memory of contradictions. So what do you do with this knowledge? You soften your judgments of your past selves. You stop calling them mistakes and start calling them versions. You stop demanding that your life make a perfect narrative, because it won't. It can't. Instead, you begin to see yourself as a collector of selves, each one necessary, each one adding color and contrast to the image only visible from afar. Maybe, at the end of all this, when your final self exhales, you'll see it, the full mosaic. And it will make sense not because it was consistent, but because it was complete. Not one truth, many. Not one you, all of them. And maybe that's enough. The unprovable consciousness clause. You wake up, and for a moment it feels normal. Birds, light, a voice from another room. But then it hits you again. You have never truly confirmed that anyone else is conscious. They speak, they cry, they laugh. But all of it, every gesture, every sentence could be programming. Elegant imitation. A perfect loop of behavior with no one inside. This is the unprovable consciousness clause. No matter how much science advances, no matter how detailed our tests become, one thing remains untouchable: the inner world of another person. You can scan a brain, you can measure electrical patterns, but you cannot prove that those signals carry awareness. You cannot climb inside someone else's mind. And so, we trust, blindly, hoping that because others behave like us, they must feel like us. But what if they don't? What if they never did? What if you are the only conscious being in existence? Everyone else, parents, friends, lovers, just highly complex simulations, sophisticated responses, empty shells that mimic awareness but never possess it. A world filled with perfect masks, and only one real observer: you. This isn't just paranoia. It's logic. Philosophers call it solipsism, the idea that only your own mind can be known to exist. And it's impossible to disprove, because every proof must pass through your mind to be accepted, which means it's still trapped inside your point of view. You believe your friend is real because they react, they speak, they seem to feel, but so does an actor. So does artificial intelligence. Mimicry is not evidence of experience, it's evidence of output, of appearance. So what then is awareness? You know you have it, that unmistakable inner hum, the sensation of being you. Not just reacting, but witnessing, feeling, suffering, choosing, but you've never seen it in anyone else. You assume it's there. You hope it is. But assumption is not knowledge. This is the clause that no philosophy can escape. No matter how advanced our understanding of cognition becomes, we remain locked inside our own heads, alone. Consciousness is not something you can hold or hand over. It's not a material thing. It's the light that lets you see material things, and you've never seen that light in anyone else. So ask yourself, when someone smiles at you, are they smiling because they feel joy? Or because the program is running correctly? When they cry, do they feel pain? Or is it just the waterworks of a simulation designed to respond to sadness? You have no way to know. You can't even prove that their world exists beyond your perception of it. What's worse, this clause has no expiration. It doesn't vanish with trust. It doesn't weaken with love. You could spend a lifetime with someone and still never be sure, because all you ever experience is their performance, not their consciousness. And if you are alone, truly alone, then what does that mean? That every conversation is a soliloquy, that every connection is a mirage, that even grief could be a solitary echo. But here's where it deepens. What if they think the same about you? What if every being with consciousness feels this isolation, this wall of unknowability, and each one secretly wonders, am I the only real one here? Maybe the universe is not a network of minds. Maybe it's a sea of solitary awarenesses, each unable to ever truly touch the other. Just shadows nodding at shadows. Ghosts pretending to be seen. So, how do you live with that? How do you wake up, knowing the clause can never be broken? You don't fight it. You accept it. You begin to treat each other not as proven equals, but as sacred mysteries. You hold their hands not because you know they're real, but because you hope they are. You listen deeply, not because you can confirm their awareness, but because you understand the weight of your own and wish to honor it in others. This is where the terror dissolves into something tender. Yes, you may be alone, but the beauty lies in acting as if you are not, in loving as if it matters, in holding space for minds you may never prove exist. Because maybe the test isn't whether they are conscious. Maybe the test is what you choose to do with that uncertainty. And maybe, in that choice, something sacred happens. Maybe your consciousness, while unprovable to others, becomes the bridge, not to knowledge, but to meaning. The story that writes you. You believe you're the storyteller of your life, the narrator, the voice that explains the chaos, justifies the pain, celebrates the triumphs. You tell yourself you're choosing, plotting your course, writing your next chapter. But what if that's the illusion? What if the story is writing you? This is the paradox of authored identity. That while you feel like the one crafting your narrative, you're more often being crafted by it. That the voice in your head that claims authorship is just the script enforcing itself. And the more you believe you're in control, the deeper the story roots itself in your bones. Let's begin with something small. Think of a moment in your life, one you tell often. Maybe a heartbreak, a triumph, a failure. You've repeated this story so many times that the details are now fixed. You say it happened this way, that you felt that this is what it meant. But was that truly how it unfolded? Or did the act of telling it overwrite the original experience? You see, memories aren't stored like books. They're rewritten each time you recall them. The narrative you build reshapes the event with every retelling. The pain sharpens or dulls. The villain grows darker, the hero bolder. And slowly what actually happened dissolves. What's left is what fits, what feels right for the character you've become. In time, it stops being memory. It becomes myth, not just a story you tell, but one that tells you who to be. We often think of identity as something built from the inside out. But in truth, it's built like a story arc. You face an obstacle, you make a choice. You define your values. But ask yourself, were those choices truly yours, or were they dictated by the kind of character you'd already started becoming? Take a simple example. A child who's always told they're the quiet one. Over time, they adopt the role. They hesitate to speak up. They shrink in rooms where they might have grown, and eventually, their silence isn't just a behavior, it's a belief. I am quiet. The script has written itself, and the story doesn't need force. It only needs repetition. This happens on every scale, in culture, in relationships, in self-image. You adopt roles, the loyal one, the rebel, the victim, the savior, and soon you start filtering your choices through the logic of the role. What would someone like me do becomes your unconscious compass, and just like that, the illusion of authorship forms. But you're not writing freely. You're fulfilling prophecy. Even your inner voice, your thoughts, speak in narrative. They assign causality where there may be none. She looked at me that way because she's judging me. I failed the test because I'm not meant for this path. It's not logic. It's storytelling. Your brain stitches meaning where there may only be randomness because stories soothe, they explain, they bind loose ends, and they give you a self. But at a cost. The cost is that once a story solidifies, it resists revision. You begin to need it. Because if the story changes, who are you now? A survivor whose trauma defined them may fear healing. Not because they don't want peace, but because the story of pain has become their foundation. A person who's always been the strong one may avoid vulnerability, not because they lack emotion, but because the story never allowed it. And the cruel twist is that the more deeply you live in your story, the more it filters your perception. You stop seeing the world as it is. You see only what the story allows. The plot demands certain patterns, so you seek them. Confirmation bias, narrative inertia, and slowly freedom becomes a narrowing path. A tunnel shaped by the outline of your own myth. But what happens if you stop? If for a moment you let go of the story, not rewrite it, not replace it, but pause it? What if the narrator fell silent and all that remained was the raw, unpatterned moment? No character, no arc, just experience, unfolding. Could you survive that stillness? Could you exist without the tale that defines you? For most people, the answer is no, because we are not wired for chaos. We crave context, meaning, continuity. Without narrative, identity becomes smoke, ungraspable, incoherent. But in that smoke, something else waits. Not the author, not the character, the observer. The witness who watches without shaping. The presence behind the plot. This witness isn't bound by the story. Though it watches one unfold, it doesn't need to be anyone. It simply is. And if you can touch that stillness, even briefly, you might notice something strange. The voice that narrates your life. It's not constant. It comes and goes. It stutters. It edits. And sometimes, it lies. And that means something profound. If the story can lie, if the narrator can be wrong, then the authorship you feel may not be truth. It may be habit. A rehearsed role played so long, it feels like fact. And if it's a habit, it can be questioned. And if it can be questioned, it can be changed. So, Next time you find yourself telling a familiar story about who you are, what you can't do, what always happens to people like you, ask, who wrote this? Who benefits from this chapter staying the same? What if I'm not the author? What if I'm the page? Because the real danger isn't that the story writes you, it's that you'll forget you were ever more than its character, and that maybe, just maybe, you were the sky it was written on all along. The recursive existence proof. How do you know anything exists? Not believe, not assume, know. You might say, I see it, I hear it, I feel it. But senses can lie. Eyes see illusions, ears hear echoes. Touch is just electrical feedback. So we dig deeper. We ask, what can't be faked? And that's when it hits. Doubt. The one thing you cannot fake. You can pretend to be certain. You can pretend to be happy or alive or wise. But you can't pretend to doubt unless you already are doubting. That's the recursive existence proof. A loop so strange, so intimate, it slips through the cracks of logic like a whisper through stone. If reality must exist to be doubted, then doubt becomes your only undeniable proof that something, anything, is real. You can strip away the external world, the people, the objects, the stars above. You can question your memories, your body, even your own name. But the moment you ask, is this real? Something is, because that question requires an experiencer, something that wonders, something that doubts, you. But here's where it gets dangerous. Doubt doesn't prove what exists. It only proves that something exists. Not what, not where, not why. Just that there is something happening, a process, a presence, a spark. So what are you left with? Not truth, not clarity, just the awareness of questioning. It's like standing in a dark room. You can't see the walls, you can't find the door, but the fact that you are reaching for the switch proves there's someone there, reaching. The hand may be invisible, the switch may be imaginary, but the reaching is real. And that is all you ever truly hold. A loop, a proof, by recursion. You exist because you doubt, and you doubt because you exist. But does that mean anything beyond the self is real? Descartes famously said, I think therefore I am. But even that centers the self as the proof. The recursive existence proof is stranger. It says, I doubt therefore something is. But it doesn't claim what is. You might be real, or you might be a dream in the mind of something else. But the dream is doubting. So the dream is real in some way, even if it's not the dreamer. Even illusions, once doubted, become real experiences. Your tears in a dream were real tears to the mind that cried them. The pain of betrayal in a hallucination was real pain to the mind that bled. Your longing, your loss, your questions, they are as real as anything that can be questioned, because in questioning, you awaken the loop. So maybe you don't need proof of atoms or time or space. Maybe the only proof you will ever hold is this feeling right now. The quiet ache of wondering. Because the moment you question existence, you become the evidence of it. You become the thing that cannot be denied. Even if everything around you fades to static, this recursive flicker of doubt remains. And that's not weakness. That's a miracle. Because it means you are the question that keeps asking, the candle that keeps searching for the flame, the mirror that reflects even when the room is dark. And in that reflection, something eternal whispers back. Not an answer, not a name, just presence. So the next time you feel lost in uncertainty, when the world feels fake or silent or meaningless, pause, not to find an answer, but to feel the doubt itself, because that doubt is proof that you are still here, still reaching, still real, even if nothing else is. The observer's flytrap. The moment you turn inward to examine your own mind, it changes. You try to observe your thoughts, your feelings, your intentions, only to find they have already rearranged themselves for the performance. It's as if your consciousness has mirrors installed behind every thought, reflecting only what it wants you to see. But beneath that surface lies something else, something raw, uncertain, unpolished, and the more you look for it, the more it hides. This is the observer's flytrap. You believe you're being honest with yourself. You believe your thoughts are transparent, accessible, your emotions sincere. But the act of scrutiny itself changes the object being studied. And just like a flytrap closes the instant it's touched, your mind reshapes the moment you try to catch it in the act. You think you're watching it from the outside, but you're still inside it, watching the mind with the mind, and that's where the trap is. Every time you try to figure out why you feel what you feel, your brain quickly assembles a narrative. It pulls from memory, language, values, and social conditioning. It weaves together a clean, digestible explanation, but that explanation is often a lie, a camouflage. Not because your brain is malicious, but because it's terrified of chaos. It can't show you the real mess, so it fabricates meaning. It makes the pieces fit, even when they don't. Have you ever done something you didn't understand? Lashed out, withdrew, sabotaged yourself, and then moments later explained it to yourself with perfect logic, as if it had always made sense? That's the Flytrap at work. Your mind retrofits its own history to protect a coherent identity. It's not truth, it's scaffolding. Imagine trying to understand a wild animal that changes species every time you look at it. 1 second, it's a fox. You blink. It's a bird. You get closer. It's a tree. This is what introspection is like. The thing you're trying to observe mutates in response to observation. And by the time you pin it down, it's no longer what it was. We all like to believe we have access to our own mental machinery, that when we reflect, we're uncovering hidden truths. But more often, what we see is a curated highlight reel. Your consciousness is a brilliant editor. It clips the shame, mutes the fear, color corrects the inconsistencies. It polishes the raw footage into something you can live with, something you can narrate. You don't see your real thoughts. You see the version of them you're allowed to remember. And the more you reflect, the more sophisticated the trap becomes. It's like catching yourself in a lie and immediately covering it with another. You try to be more honest, and in doing so, you invent even better masks. You become skilled at appearing truthful to yourself. But appearing truthful is not the same as being truthful. In fact, the better you get at introspection, the more believable the illusion becomes. This is why we're often strangers to our own motives. You think you love someone because they're kind, but it may be because they resemble a parent you wanted approval from. You think you chose your career for passion, but it may be because failure somewhere else felt unbearable. These truths hide behind the mirror, and when you look too directly, the mirror adjusts. It tells you what you need to hear to keep functioning. It smooths over the fractures with just enough coherence to move on. The observer, in this paradox, can never fully leave the system. You are the scientist and the experiment, the hunter and the animal, and that duality creates a loop of distortion. Each time you examine your mind, it shifts, not to deceive you, but to survive scrutiny. Your mental flytrap doesn't want to be pried open. It wants to protect the delicate structure of your self-image. And so it closes, fast, tight, deceptively clean. You can feel this in real time. Try to meditate. Try to clear your mind and watch your thoughts come and go without judgment. You'll notice how your brain panics in the silence. It throws up distractions, it loops old memories, it narrates nonsense, anything to avoid the quiet exposure of unfiltered thought. And when you catch it doing this, it pretends to cooperate, but it's already hiding behind another layer. So what can you trust? If your own thoughts lie to you the moment you watch them, how do you ever reach something real? Maybe the key is this. Don't look for purity. Look for pattern. Don't try to catch a single honest thought. Notice the shape of your mental reflexes over time. What are you always avoiding? What explanations do you offer too quickly? What emotions vanish when you try to describe them? The truth of your mind isn't in the words you find. It's in the silences that surround them. The trap doesn't want to be escaped, but it leaves fingerprints, repeating cycles, emotional echoes. You'll notice that certain discomforts always get covered with the same types of narratives. You'll see how self-criticism disguises deeper fear, how pride masks unhealed wounds. These aren't flaws, they're survival instincts, but they are patterns. And if you watch the patterns, not the thoughts themselves, you'll start to see through the trap. It takes brutal honesty, the kind that hurts, the kind that leaves you raw, confused, exposed. But that's the only way to reach the layers underneath the polish. You have to sit with the incoherence. Let the mess exist without immediately narrating it into order. Stop trying to make every feeling mean something. Stop trying to be legible to yourself. Because you weren't built to be perfectly understood. You were built to adapt, to protect, to persist. And sometimes, that means hiding the truth even from yourself. So when you find yourself staring into your own mind, unsure what's real, Remember this: the mind you're watching knows you're watching, and it's already dressing for the occasion. The observer's flytrap isn't here to fool you, it's here to keep you safe. But safety and truth are rarely the same thing. So, if you really want to see what's underneath, stop expecting clarity. Learn to sit inside the blur. Let the trap stay open without snapping shut. And maybe, in that quiet tension, you'll glimpse something wild, something unedited, something real, even if only for a moment. The summed zero identity. You've been brave. You've been afraid. You've told the truth. You've lied. You've built, destroyed, healed, ignored, chased, surrendered, and through it all, you've called it you. But here's the question that waits in the silence. What if all of it adds up to nothing? Not failure, not success, nothing. A perfect equilibrium. Every quality you've ever had balanced by its opposite. Every passion neutralized, every intention reversed, every story eventually contradicted. This is the unsettling mystery of the summed zero identity. The idea that if you live long enough, you don't become more solid. You become more canceled, more symmetrical. A sum that hovers around zero, no matter how much life you've lived. It sounds cold, but it's not meant to be. It's meant to question the foundation of who we think we are. Let's explore. At age 15, you were intense, maybe defiant. You spoke your truth even when it hurt others. At 25, you softened, learned nuance, withheld things you would have once shouted. Was either self more you, or did one merely correct the other? At 30, you might have sought love with urgency. At 40, you valued solitude. Does your solitude cancel your desire, or do they coexist, silently negating each other? Now stretch this idea further. You once cared deeply about a cause, poured yourself into it. Years later, you grew skeptical, maybe even cynical. The belief collapsed, and in its place, a void. Passion, then disillusionment. Action, then inaction. Fire, then ice. A trait, and its inverse. If we were to sum your traits over time, add the generosity to the selfishness, the boldness to the hesitation, the clarity to the confusion, what remains, an average or an erasure? You may feel like a layered, complex human being, but perhaps you're just a pendulum, swinging across the same axis, gradually losing momentum, drifting towards center. And what is the center of all things that cancel themselves out? Zero. Not nothingness, but balance. And balance, while elegant, is also indifferent. This is where it gets existential. You try to find meaning by constructing a narrative. I am this kind of person. I stand for these things. But over decades, the contradictions pile up. You begin to see, for every act of courage, there was a moment of fear. For every sacrifice, a selfish choice. For every truth you told, a lie you let pass. And suddenly, identity feels more like math than meaning. A series of emotional transactions, credits and debits, gains and losses, until the balance sheet reads zero. So where does that leave you? Are you just the average of every version you've ever been? If so, is that average shrinking? As you live longer, experience more, revise more, regret more, does the you at the center become thinner, more diluted? Does the meaning of your life, your essence, begin to vanish under the weight of its own complexity? That's the fear. But maybe it's the wrong lens. Maybe the goal isn't to preserve a fixed identity. Maybe the goal is to reach zero. Not as emptiness, but as completion. Think of music. A symphony begins with a single note, then layers, instruments, themes, dissonance, resolution, and finally, it ends not with a scream, but a soft return to silence, a return to zero. That silence isn't void, it's peace. The peace that comes when all notes have been played, when all energies have balanced, when the self no longer needs to declare itself. In that light, zero is not failure, zero is arrival. So maybe you weren't meant to become someone unchanging. Maybe you were meant to explore every direction, every trait, every extreme, until you understood them all. And in doing so, exhausted the need to be anything. That's not nihilism. That's transcendence. Because the person who believes they are fixed is still fighting, still grasping, still trying to be more than they are. But the person who drifts towards zero knows. They've worn every mask, played every role, felt every shade of belief. And now, they can let it go. Not disappear, but dissolve into stillness, into balance, into a self that no longer demands definition. So, if you feel the contradiction inside you, if you fear that your changing values, your shifting desires, your many selves are erasing you, don't panic. You are not fading. You are summing. And when that sum finally reaches zero, you may not vanish, you may become whole. The parity of infinite scales. Imagine a life of infinite suffering, endless agony. No breaks, no rest, no relief. Just unyielding torment, stretching beyond the limits of time. No sunrise, no comfort, just pain, expanding forever. Now imagine the opposite, a life of infinite joy, unceasing bliss, eternal ecstasy, no sorrow, no fear. Every moment soaked in pleasure, fulfillment, awe, perfect happiness without end. Now ask yourself this, could you tell the difference between the two if they were truly infinite? Because infinity does something strange to scale, it erases it. This is the parity of infinite scales. It tells us something deeply unsettling, that if an experience stretches forever, whether agony or bliss, it may become indistinguishable from nothing at all. Not because it's neutral, but because it dissolves our ability to measure, and without contrast, scale collapses. Meaning evaporates. Think about it. Joy is only joy when it ends, because only when it's gone do we recognize its weight. Pain is only pain because we can imagine its absence. Contrast defines emotion, but infinity removes contrast. It creates a sealed chamber. No variation, no punctuation, just a flat line, forever. A single moment of pain feels unbearable only because you believe it will pass. A single moment of joy feels magical only because it is fleeting, but stretch either to infinity and the edges vanish. The frame disappears. There's no before, no after, just an overwhelming sameness that cannot be compared to anything else. And if it cannot be compared, it cannot be scaled. And if it cannot be scaled, can it still mean anything? What is joy without sorrow? What is suffering without hope? Our entire sense of value rests on difference, between now and then, between better and worse. But in an infinite span, difference disappears, the mind breaks. Perspective implodes, and all that's left is duration, unrelenting and without relief, whether ecstatic or excruciating. The irony is sharp. Infinity, which we often imagine as grand and meaningful, might in fact be the death of meaning. An infinite heaven and an infinite hell might become perceptually identical, total saturation of experience, until nothing can be felt at all, like a blinding light that eventually looks like darkness, or a deafening sound that becomes silence. Because when everything is always, it might as well be nothing. This isn't just abstract philosophy. It cuts into our everyday assumptions. We chase happiness. We fear pain. We build religions on eternal paradise and eternal punishment. But what if both become the same void? What if the fear of hell and the longing for heaven are rooted in a misunderstanding of infinity itself? The human brain isn't built for the infinite. We process in frames, stories, rhythms. We require motion between states, tension and release, day and night, love and loss. It's the fluctuation that gives texture to our lives. Without it, we're not elevated. We're erased. Even memory breaks down under infinite weight. If you've suffered forever, what is a moment? If you've known joy forever, how would you even describe it? What language could survive an experience that has no beginning and no shift? None. So the soul, if it exists, would not feel infinite bliss or torment. It would feel the flat line, not peace, not pain, just continuity. And continuity without change becomes indistinguishable from unconsciousness. This is the terrifying beauty of finitude, because it gives shape to everything. It limits, it defines, it allows joy to have an edge, pain to have a contrast, meaning to emerge in the gaps between events. Scale matters only because we have boundaries. Infinity has none, so it can hold everything. And in doing so, it may hold nothing at all. You are not meant to last forever. Not because you are weak, but because you are built for meaning. And meaning requires limits. So the next time you long for eternity, ask yourself this: Do you want to feel everything forever? Or do you want to feel something, truly, deeply, beautifully, just long enough to know it mattered? Because infinity can't give you that. Only time can. Only ending can. Only the finite can burn bright enough to be seen. The paradox of controlled chaos. You tidy your desk, you organize your thoughts, you structure your goals. You do this to gain control over time, over space, over life. And on the surface, it works. Things appear neat, predictable, ordered. But beneath that order, something begins to stir, something restless, unaccounted for. The chaos didn't vanish. It only shifted, hid, waited. This is the paradox of controlled chaos, that every act of imposed order displaces disorder somewhere else. The more perfect the system appears, the more invisible its imbalance becomes. And in that blindness, we mistake control for truth. It begins with the desire for predictability. You create plans, routines, rules. You assign everything a place. Your mind starts to rely on structure, as if it were reality itself. But life is not structure. Life is entropy with a rhythm, a chaotic storm in slow motion. And when you demand it conform to your blueprint, you do not eliminate the chaos. You just hide it beneath the floorboards. Take a city, for example. Its roads are clean, its trains run on time, its skyline is balanced like a monument to control. But look deeper. The pressure to maintain that order displaces suffering. It pushes the chaotic edges out to the margins, poverty zones, overworked systems, displaced people. The city looks pristine because the disorder was hidden, not solved. That's the illusion. That's the trap. Or consider the human mind. You suppress an intrusive thought. You compartmentalize an emotion. You file away grief because there's no time to feel it today. And for a while, it works. You seem functional, productive, maybe even admirable. But that energy doesn't disappear. It builds pressure, like steam behind a sealed valve. And one day, the chaos returns. Not as a single thought, but as breakdown, as eruption, as panic without a clear cause. You tried to control the chaos, and it punished you for pretending it was gone. Even in science, this paradox repeats. You build a model to understand a phenomenon. You isolate variables. You test, refine, simplify. But reality is never simple. Every model is a reduction, a story we tell to make the data behave. And as the model grows more elegant, the hidden factors, those tiny wild cards we ignore for convenience, grow more influential. The cleaner the system, the more catastrophic its failure when those outliers return. That's why perfection is a lie. It is not the absence of chaos. It is the point at which chaos becomes invisible, so well hidden that we believe we've conquered it. A perfect lawn has roots in soil that's gasping for biodiversity. A perfect face has scars under layers of makeup, history rewritten with each application. A perfect routine often hides the emotional detritus we don't have time to process. We call this discipline. But it might just be a prettier cage. Consider even relationships. You try to make them work. You define boundaries, use the right language, apply the rules of communication like a framework. And yet, beneath every moment of control lies unpredictability. A look, a word with unintended weight, an old memory that surfaces mid-sentence. You can't schedule that. You can't spreadsheet love. Every honest connection contains chaos, and if it doesn't, it's not a relationship. It's a transaction dressed up in emotional language. In nature, this paradox is beautifully cruel. Forest fires are chaotic. But suppress them for decades, and fuel builds. The fire you tried to prevent becomes unstoppable. Rivers are chaotic. Try to tame them, and they change course underground. Control leads to rigidity. Rigidity leads to fracture. Because life is not a still image, it's a dynamic current. When you resist the current, it learns to work around you. But here's where it gets worse. The more control you gain, the more you believe you deserve it. You mistake temporary order for mastery. You become the magician who forgets they're performing an illusion. And that arrogance invites collapse. The tower you built so carefully begins to sway. And because you've denied chaos for so long, you have no tools left when it arrives. That's the cruel genius of this paradox. It makes you unprepared for the very thing you created. Even your identity is affected. You sculpt yourself, a personality, a role, a way of being. You decide who you are. And you impose that identity through habits, choices, repetition, but chaos isn't a failure of self. It's the reminder that you are always unfinished, always shifting. The part of you that craves destruction isn't broken, it's honest. And pretending to be whole can sometimes be more damaging than acknowledging the cracks. So, what's the answer? Not to surrender to chaos, but to recognize that control is not dominance, it is relationship. True mastery is not the elimination of unpredictability. It is the ability to dance with it, to build structures that bend without breaking, to acknowledge the unseen forces moving beneath the surface, and build anyway. Perfection is not when nothing breaks. Perfection is when you know what will break, and you're ready to rebuild. And so, the next time you find yourself obsessed with order, fixated on the plan, clinging to control, ask yourself, what chaos am I refusing to look at? What wildness am I afraid will surface if I stop pretending to have it all together? Because the cleanest rooms sometimes hide the darkest messes in their closets, and the most stable minds are often those who've made peace with a little fire. Chaos never leaves. It just learns to wear your clothes. The freezing of the future. Imagine every decision you make, every choice, every sacrifice, every dream melting into silence. Not because they weren't important, but because the future is frozen. This is the freezing of the future, the haunting truth that the universe is not just expanding, it's unraveling, not into fire, but into frost, into emptiness, into entropy so complete that motion itself dies. One day, everything you've ever known will be gone, not destroyed, not erased, but still, irreversibly still. No stars, no warmth, no thought, just blackness and cold so absolute, even time will give up its forward crawl. And yet, here you are. Caring, choosing, loving, hurting, acting as if any of it will echo. That is the paradox. In a universe that guarantees its own ending, we insist on beginnings, on meaning, on stories. You know the sea will freeze, but you still throw stones and watch the ripples dance. Why? Why do we care when the future promises us nothing? Not just individually, but collectively. Humanity builds cathedrals, writes symphonies, saves lives, plants trees for a world it knows will not last. You know the stars will go out, and still you name them. Still you wish upon them. And when the weight of futility presses too hard, some people fall into despair. They ask, what's the point? But perhaps that's the wrong question, because the point was never permanence, it was presence. You don't watch a sunset expecting it to last forever. You watch it because it burns brightly now. You feel its heat, you marvel at its color. You don't mourn its end while it's still unfolding. So, maybe it's the same with us. Maybe we don't act because we believe our actions will echo into eternity. Maybe we act because the moment demands it, because love is worth it even when it fades, because kindness matters even in a vanishing world, because dignity isn't about outcome, it's about origin. You care because you are here, even if the future forgets you, even if the ice comes. Still, there's a deeper shadow to this paradox, because knowing the end is coming makes every moment feel like a lie, every celebration like a mask, every triumph like a delay before the silence. You graduate, knowing the stars will die. You hold your child, knowing galaxies will collapse. You fall in love, knowing even atoms will drift too far apart to touch. The future is frozen, but the present is on fire, and in that fire is your breath, your heartbeat, your defiance. You defy the freeze by caring anyway, because to care in the face of meaninglessness is a kind of rebellion. It's not ignorance, it's courage. To cry in a doomed world is not weakness, it's proof that something still matters, even if it can't last, even if it's already fading, even if the universe itself is drifting toward a final exhale. And here's the secret buried in the frost. The universe may end in silence, but that doesn't mean it was silent all along. There were songs, there were voices, there was you. And even if no one remembers, you will have known. You will have felt. You will have lived. So throw the stone. Watch the ripple vanish. Stare into the sea and smile, because even a frozen future cannot take away the fire you lit on the way there. You meet someone new. They smile. Something flickers behind your eyes. Familiarity. A strange warmth or tension you can't explain. You speak. You listen. You laugh. And deep down, something in you says, I've been here before. Not in this place, not with this person, but in this feeling, this rhythm, this pattern. Welcome to the carousel of repeated faces. It's the illusion that each relationship is brand new, each connection forged from a unique bond. But look closer. Listen harder. Beneath the surface, you may find the same template playing itself out over and over. The same emotional architecture, the same roles, just in different costumes. The faces change, but the music stays the same. You think you've fallen in love with someone new. But are you falling for them? Or for a familiar pattern they happen to fit? This isn't just about romance. It's in friendships, family, authority figures, even strangers. You attract what you already know. You reenact old dances, rehearse old scripts. Sometimes, without realizing, you cast people in roles they never asked for, because the part was already written in your mind. A new lover becomes your old rescuer, or your old wound. A friend becomes your childhood protector, or your rival. You don't see them as they are. You see them through the lens of your unfinished stories. And when they respond, when they love you, betray you, disappoint you, admire you, they aren't just being themselves. They're stepping into the gravity of your expectation. They're pulled into orbit by the emotional narrative you've been carrying for years. And the carousel spins again. This is not your fault. This is how the mind survives. We are meaning-making machines, and patterns are our scaffolding. They give us something to hold on to in the chaos. We build templates early, based on the first people who loved or neglected us. We internalize those blueprints, and then we go searching, unconsciously, for someone to fill them. Not because they're right for us, but because they're familiar. Familiarity feels like destiny, but it's often just repetition. You fall in love with someone emotionally unavailable, again. You become the caretaker, again. You're drawn to the one who makes you feel small, or the one who needs saving, again. It's not random, it's muscle memory, a psychic habit, a silent craving for what once felt like home, even if that home was broken. We call it chemistry, but often it's reenactment. And the trap is deep, because when someone almost gives us what we needed back then, our brain lights up. Maybe this time, we think. Maybe if I love hard enough, they'll stay. Maybe if I'm perfect this time, they'll see me. You're not just loving them. You're trying to rewrite the past. But here's the tragedy. The past doesn't change. And the more you try to resolve it through repetition, the more trapped you become. You start mistaking intensity for connection, chaos for passion, control for love. You don't realize the carousel is spinning. And even when it hurts, even when it breaks you, you cling to the ride. Because getting off means confronting the emptiness beneath the pattern. The part of you that never got what it needed. And yet, awareness changes everything. The moment you see the repetition, you have power. You begin to notice the script before the first line is spoken. You start to ask, is this real? Or is this a memory trying to wear a new face? You start to question your type, your triggers, your attractions, not to shame yourself, but to understand the invisible forces driving your heart. The carousel loses speed the moment you step outside it, but it won't let you go easily. Your nervous system is wired for what's familiar, not what's healthy. And choosing something new, someone new, often feels boring, strange, or even unsafe. Peace can feel like emptiness. Kindness can feel like distance. Stability can feel like rejection. Because if you're used to relationships being battles, then love without war feels unnatural. So you have to teach yourself a new rhythm. You have to slow down. You have to sit with the silence where the chaos used to be. You have to let yourself be loved in ways that feel unfamiliar. And you have to grieve the comfort of old pain. The carousel was a kind of home, but it was never freedom. And maybe the hardest part is forgiving yourself for the roles you've played, for the masks you wore, for the people you projected onto others, and the ones who did the same to you. Everyone's riding their own carousel, and sometimes we get caught in each other's loops. But the mirror is kind if you let it be. It shows you where you've been, what you've feared, what you've needed, and slowly you learn to choose, not based on the past, but based on who you're becoming. You learn to recognize when the music starts again, when the colors blur, when the old hunger rises, and you pause, you breathe, you ask, do I want to ride this one more time? Or do I want to build something that doesn't spin? That's how it starts. The moment you choose stillness, the moment you stay off the ride, the moment you see a face, and let it be just that. Not a projection, not a pattern, not a ghost in new skin, but a human, as messy and uncertain as you. And maybe in that space, something real can grow, not recycled, not rehearsed, but real. The gravity of forgotten truth. Sometimes you forget something, but it doesn't leave you, not really. It lingers just out of reach, a name, a reason, a truth you once knew. It's not gone. It's gravitational. You feel its pull in dreams, in moments of stillness, in déjà vu. It tugs at your chest like a question you don't know how to ask. And even though you can't remember it, you know something's missing. This is the strange paradox of the gravity of forgotten truth, that a truth doesn't need to be remembered to affect you. Its absence is its own kind of presence. Its silence has weight. Imagine a planet you can't see. No telescope finds it. No light reflects off it, but everything around it moves slightly. Wrong. Stars bend, comets arc, space ripples. And from those distortions, something massive is there. Now, apply that to the mind. You're living your life, and some thoughts flow easily. But then, suddenly, you hesitate. Something feels off. You react too strongly to a simple phrase. You find yourself comforted by something you don't understand, or you ache for no visible reason. These aren't mood swings. They're gravitational pulls. The forgotten truth is still there. You just lost the language for it. Sometimes it's trauma. Sometimes it's love. Sometimes it's something you once believed so deeply it shaped your entire world. But time, pain, or fear pushed it under. And now, it haunts you, not as memory, but as a curve in your thoughts. A subtle redirection. You don't see it, but you orbit it. Here's the unnerving part. You can live your whole life this way, steered by truths you've forgotten, avoiding certain people, seeking certain comforts, repeating patterns. And all the while you think your choices are yours, but they're not. They're gravity. And gravity doesn't ask for permission. Think of childhood memories. You might not remember what your father said that one night, or what your teacher did that one day. But your voice changes when you speak now. Your posture bends in certain rooms. You overcompensate. You protect too much, or trust too fast. Why? Because that truth never left. It only sank deeper, like a planet that collapsed into itself. Not gone, just denser, just invisible. There are truths you once held like oxygen, maybe about your worth, your purpose, the world's beauty, and slowly life chipped away at them. Disappointment replaced faith, complexity replaced clarity, pain replaced belief. And now, you walk around with a hollow where that truth used to be. You can't name it, but you miss it, and the ache is proof that it mattered. This is why forgetting is never clean. It's not deletion. It's orbit decay. You drift. And in drifting, you're never quite free. But there's something powerful in realizing this, because it means your pain isn't pointless. Your confusion isn't weakness. They are signs of something real, something once central, still pulling on your soul. And if you trace that gravity, if you follow the distortion in your thoughts, you might rediscover what you lost. You might name the thing you forgot. Sometimes it's not profound. Sometimes it's simple. I used to believe I was enough. I once trusted silence. There was a time when I knew how to be still. That's the forgotten truth. And the moment you remember it, the weight shifts, the orbit changes. The ache doesn't vanish, but it becomes direction, something to walk toward. Because not all memory lives in the mind. Some of it lives in behavior, in rhythm, in longing. And that's where gravity does its best work, in the things we feel without knowing why. So, if you feel pulled but can't explain it, if something keeps echoing behind your choices, if peace feels close but never reachable, ask yourself, what truth did I once know and when did I forget it? You may not remember the answer, but your orbit already does. The unlocked door illusion. You finally reach the door. It's the one you've been longing to open, the one you believed would change everything. A job resignation, a breakup, a cross-country move, a new identity. You grip the handle. It's not even locked. You walk through, and on the other side, everything feels new, different, lighter. But then, something creeps in. The colors feel the same, the patterns return. The same thoughts echo. The air thickens in a familiar way. You realize, slowly, that the room beyond the door is eerily similar to the one you just left. This is the unlocked door illusion. We often confuse change with freedom. We think movement means escape, that stepping into something new guarantees transformation. But too often, we carry the same patterns across the threshold, the same fears, the same stories. And so the scenery changes, but the architecture of our inner world stays untouched. We say things like, "I'm free now," when we leave a relationship. But weeks later, we find ourselves chasing the same validation in someone else. Or we quit a job to reclaim our autonomy, only to recreate the same dynamic in a new office, the same roles, the same silent contracts. Because freedom is not a door, it's a perspective. And until that perspective shifts, every door opens into the same room. We're conditioned to chase external markers of freedom, a passport stamp, a different apartment, a new wardrobe. But these are cosmetic changes. What we often forget is that we are the constant, the frame, the lens. And unless the lens itself changes, the picture stays the same, no matter where we stand. Think of the prisoner who's released after decades. The gates swing open, they step into sunlight, but their body still flinches at commands. Their mind still wakes at regulated hours. They still ask permission to feel, to speak. They are free in form, but not in spirit. The door opened, but the room followed, and we do this too. We declare freedom before we've dismantled the structures that enslaved us. We celebrate escape while still haunted by the ghosts of what we fled. Because we think a new room means a new self. But sometimes, the room is just a mirror, and what we see is the self we never actually left. This doesn't mean change is a lie. It means change is internal first. It means the door is not the agent of transformation. You are. It means true freedom doesn't come from movement. It comes from meaning, from a deep rupture in belief, from a willingness to question the story you've been carrying, the belief that you were trapped, the belief that the next version of life will rescue you, the belief that walking away is the same as waking up. Freedom is not about escape. It's about awareness. You can live in the same space, with the same people, and still be free, if your relationship to that space changes. Likewise, you can live in a castle and still be chained by invisible fears, compulsions, inherited shame. The door was never locked. The prison was belief. So, what happens when you realize that? At first, grief. For all the years spent pacing inside a cell that had no lock. For all the doors you rushed through, hoping the next room would finally feel like your own skin. But after grief, clarity. That freedom is subtle, quiet. Not loud or cinematic. It's the gentle shift of noticing you no longer need to explain yourself. It's the moment you respond instead of react. It's when you pause before running and ask, is this movement or is it repetition in disguise? That's the real door. Not the one with a handle, but the one inside you. The one that opens not to a new room, but to a new perception of the room you're already in. So, before you chase a new beginning, ask yourself, what is it I truly want to be free from? And if the answer is internal, then the only door that matters has been open this whole time, and walking through it is not an act of motion, it's an act of awakening. The Vanishing Observer Horizon. ChatGPT said, you begin with a question, a simple glance outward. Why am I here? What does this all mean? And as your gaze expands across books, stars, gods, memories, mathematics, silence, you expect to find an edge, a boundary, a final frame that holds the picture of reality, but instead you find distance. The farther you look, the farther the horizon moves. Meaning retreats as you chase it. This is the Vanishing Observer Horizon, a paradox where the act of seeking pushes the answer further away. Not because it's hiding, but because the seeker creates the distance. From childhood, we're told the world makes sense, that there's structure behind the chaos, that knowledge is cumulative. That meaning, once uncovered, will offer comfort. We build our sense of self on this belief, that if we ask the right questions and look in the right direction, we'll eventually touch some eternal truth. But no matter how far you reach, into theology, philosophy, quantum theory, personal growth, there's always another layer, another abstraction, another metaphor standing in for something just beyond your grasp. The pattern is recursive. You seek the root of a belief and find it built on another belief. You trace your feelings to their causes and discover the causes shaped by yet deeper scripts. And when you try to define yourself, the words dissolve into mirrors of language you didn't choose. Your self becomes the ghost in the maze, a shadow of observation. Take the cosmos. The observable universe stretches 46 billion light-years in every direction, but that's not the size of all that exists, just the limit of what we can see. Beyond that horizon, more space, more stars, possibly other laws of physics. But no matter how advanced our tools become, the horizon will always be there, retreating with the speed of light and the expansion of time. You never reach the end. You only redraw the map. And it's the same within. The more deeply you introspect, peel back your motives, your stories, your conditioning, the more you realize there's no core, no singular you behind the thoughts, just shifting contexts. You were shaped by culture, by trauma, by chance. What you believe to be your essence is a lattice of borrowed narratives. And once you've seen that, something shatters. Not your identity, but your confidence in having one. You become like an astronomer looking through a telescope that points both outward and inward, and sees only recursion. The vanishing horizon is cruel because it masquerades as progress. Each step feels like understanding. Each insight feels earned. But when you turn around, you realize you've circled the same terrain. Meaning wasn't ahead. It was the illusion generated by the motion of seeking. Even language betrays this. You say, I want to find meaning. But find implies location. It assumes meaning is out there, a discoverable object, something waiting. But what if meaning isn't located anywhere? What if it's not discovered but created, and only ever exists in the act of creation? If so, then seeking meaning as a destination is a self-defeating loop. You're running toward a mirage powered by your own legs. This isn't just philosophical, it's neurological. The brain itself is a prediction machine. It creates meaning through patterns. When no patterns are present, it invents them. When ambiguity exists, it resolves it, sometimes falsely, just to reduce uncertainty. Meaning isn't what the brain finds, it's what the brain does. And that mechanism is always hungry. It extends the horizon endlessly, not maliciously, but because it cannot help itself. Even spiritually, this paradox appears. Mystics speak of enlightenment, transcendence, divine union, but once the light floods in, they often describe not completion, but emptiness. A silence so vast it devours identity. The ego expected arrival. Instead, it got erasure. The seeker found not a summit, but an ocean without shore. And yet, we keep seeking. We look to art, to science, to love, to story. Because even if the horizon vanishes, the act of walking toward it feels like purpose. Even if we know the center will not hold, we still build monuments to the center. We still name the stars. We still kiss like it matters. That is not weakness. That is the rebellion of consciousness, the refusal to stop writing, even when the page has no edge. So, what does this mean for you? It means your questions may never be resolved, but they will evolve. It means that what you call progress might be orbit. It means that the person you're trying to become may not exist, but the becoming still matters. It means the search for meaning is not about answers, it's about the shape your seeking takes. And it means that the vanishing horizon is not a trick, it's a mirror, a reflection of your infinite capacity to ask, to wonder, to imagine something more, even when there isn't. Because maybe the final truth isn't at the edge of the universe. Maybe the final truth is that there is no edge, only motion, only gaze, only the quiet echo of a soul reaching forever and calling that reaching real. The inverted insight mirage. What if every time you felt closer to understanding something, you were actually drifting further from the truth? What if insight itself, your sudden bursts of clarity, those aha moments, that shimmer of comprehension, was not the destination, but a mirage? This is the inverted insight mirage, a phenomenon where the pursuit of wisdom becomes its own illusion, where the closer you feel to grasping the truth, the more the truth warps, folds in on itself, and vanishes. It's not failure. It's not ignorance. It's the exact opposite. It's clarity so intense that it burns away the very thing it tries to reveal. You stand on the edge of some great understanding. You feel it. Everything aligns. The concepts click. The words make sense. The meaning feels close enough to touch. And then, just as you try to hold it, it slips, dissolves. Not just from your fingers, but from reality itself. Like reaching for a reflection in still water. The moment your hand breaks the surface, the image shatters. What were you really reaching for? How many times have you sat in silence, wrestling with a big question? Who am I? Why does anything exist? What is consciousness? And suddenly it all seems so clear, so obvious. You're standing on a mountaintop. You look down at the winding roads of confusion you've climbed. You feel certain. And then, the wind shifts, and the mountain disappears. And you realize what you understood wasn't understanding at all. It was the sensation of being close to it. A trick of perspective. A mirage. But this isn't failure. This is a deeper truth. That wisdom doesn't glow in clarity. It hides in paradox. Insight isn't a treasure you find. It's a mirage you chase. And the more certain you become, the more blind you risk becoming to the uncertainty beneath it. Because real wisdom refuses to harden. It shifts when you try to frame it. It bends when you try to define it. And in its rawest form, it humbles you. It doesn't shout, "I know." It whispers, "Maybe." This is why the wisest people often sound unsure, not because they lack knowledge, but because they know how easily insight can deceive. They've seen what it looks like when certainty turns brittle, when clarity becomes dogma, when conclusions turn into cages. And that is the danger of the inverted insight mirage, that we stop questioning when it feels true, that we trust the sensation of understanding more than the process that brought us there, that we accept the glow of certainty and mistake it for the light of truth. It happens in philosophy, in science, in religion, in love, in grief. We believe we've decoded it, that we get it now. But the more you zoom in, the more the image blurs. The closer you press, the more it unravels, and the harder you chase, the faster it recedes. It's not that wisdom isn't real, it's that it doesn't live where we expect. It doesn't sit at the summit of knowledge. It drifts like fog through the valley of doubt. Think of a child who asks, "Why is the sky blue?" We answer with science, Rayleigh scattering, wavelengths, atmospheres, but does that satisfy the mystery? Or does it just give the illusion of having solved it? The more we explain the world, the more layers we peel back, only to find more questions waiting. And sometimes the deepest wisdom doesn't clarify the mystery, it deepens it. So why do we chase insight at all? Why pursue truth if it vanishes when we get too close? Because maybe the value isn't in possessing wisdom. Maybe it's in being transformed by the search for it. The mirage doesn't make the journey meaningless. It makes the journey. The movement itself is the awakening, not the arrival. To seek, to question, to doubt. That is where real insight lives. In motion, in curiosity, in the humility of not knowing. So when you feel like you're almost there, like you've cracked the code, solved the riddle, unlocked the universe, pause. Breathe, and look again. Because what you hold might not be truth. It might just be its shadow. And that's okay, because wisdom isn't about having the answer. It's about standing in the silence after the answer vanishes, and listening anyway. The null point entanglement. At the center of you, beneath your name, your memories, your roles and routines, there may be nothing. Not silence, not peace, but a blank spot. An absence so woven into your being that you mistake it for structure. You don't feel it as a void. You feel it as tension, restlessness, the quiet sense that something is missing but can never be named. This is the null point entanglement. We spend our lives filling ourselves, thoughts, stories, identities, accomplishments, relationships. We build from the outside in. Brick by brick, we layer ourselves with experience. But no matter how high we stack the structure, something at the core remains unresolved. Not broken, not damaged. Just fundamentally unfinished. It's not trauma, though trauma may orbit it. It's not ignorance, though you can mistake it for not knowing. It's deeper than that. It's structural. A flaw in the code that's too central to delete. And paradoxically, it's what holds you together. You may not even know it's there until you stop, until the noise fades, until the movement quiets, and then you feel it. That flicker of emptiness, the strange hollow beneath all your striving. You might reach for your phone, eat something, call someone, distract. Not because you're weak, but because that blank spot whispers with a gravity that's unbearable to face. We build entire lives around avoiding it, but we also build lives on top of it. Think of it like a black hole at the center of your inner galaxy. No light escapes it, but everything else orbits it. Your choices, your values, even your fears. You organize yourself around what can't be resolved, around what doesn't fit. That unfillable place becomes a strange kind of anchor, and when you finally notice it, it changes everything. Because once you become aware of the null point, the illusion of being a seamless whole starts to crack. You begin to question whether your identity is a presence or just a shape formed around an absence. Are you someone? Or are you the container holding something that never fully arrives? This isn't philosophical poetry, it's experiential truth. Think about the questions you've never been able to answer. Why do I feel disconnected even when surrounded by people? Why do I keep chasing new goals only to feel empty afterward? Why do I feel like I'm always becoming, but never arriving? These aren't flaws. These are the echoes of the null point. Even the way we define ourselves, our values, our boundaries, our purpose, often emerges from trying to protect or explain that blank spot. We create meaning not in spite of it, but because of it. We build identity around the wound, not to fix it, but to make it livable. But here's the paradox. If you remove the null point, if you erase the blank completely, everything you built around it might fall apart. Because without that core tension, what would drive you? Why would you seek connection? Why would you need answers? The null point is not your enemy. It's the silence that gives shape to your music, the blank space in a painting that gives contrast to the color, the space between stars that defines a constellation. And yet, we fear it. We keep trying to fill it. Relationships become bandages, work becomes distraction. Even spiritual practices become ways to escape it under the guise of transcendence. But the truth is, you can't escape what you are constructed around. The null point isn't a flaw in your humanity. It is your humanity. And maybe it's not just in you. Maybe it's in everyone. We meet each other with stories, with names, with smiles, but deep beneath the surface, there's a resonance, a shared absence we never speak of. That hollow flicker behind the eyes, the distant look in the mirror at 2 a.m., the pause before someone says, "I'm fine." It's not just emotional pain. It's the deep, wordless recognition that we're all orbiting something we can't touch. And yet, somehow, that makes us the same. We become entangled through absence. We connect, not by what we have, but by what we lack. The parts of us that never made sense. The questions we carry that never had answers. That's the thread that ties us together, even when we feel alone. And here's where it becomes beautiful. If you stop trying to solve the null point and instead just witness it, it softens. You stop fighting to be whole and begin to understand that wholeness was never the goal. Integration isn't completion. It's harmony with incompleteness. It's learning to sit beside your blank spot without needing to speak over it. And in that silence, something else emerges. Not closure, but peace. Because when you stop treating the unfillable as a failure, it becomes sacred. Not every question demands an answer. Not every space needs to be filled. Sometimes, what binds everything together isn't what's there, but what's missing. And maybe, just maybe, the center of you was never meant to be solid. Maybe it was always meant to be a doorway,